Got a pretty full agenda, so we'll go ahead and kick off. The team has confirmed that we have a quorum, so we'll call to order and we'll move to item number 2, updates from CART Committee and RTA Board regarding CART and TMC roles. I'll turn it over to you, Dan.
And we may not need the entire 30 minutes for this item. Really, I allotted that time in case we needed some additional time to have a quorum, but certainly if the discussion leads there, we have that time allotted. So what we wanted to discuss with this item was, one, we have reconvened the CART, and we're seeking input both from the CART members themselves, the board, as well as this committee on the CART's role and TMC's role moving forward. If you recall, as part of the admin code, that is addressed in Section 8, Accountability, Oversight, and Transparency, which is the section right before the POPs and what's recommended to be included in the POPs moving forward. With that, we just wanted to seek some input from this committee on what you all feel those roles should be moving forward. But before you all provide some feedback, just a brief overview of some of the comments we've received from the board and the CART themselves, as well as some recommendations from staff is, one, keeping the CART moving forward on a more regular basis. So as suggested, quarterly moving forward, and that committee would be able to provide updates directly to the board so that we could have that transparent line of communication moving forward. And per the bylaws and the current language in the admin code, the role of the CART to date has been partially financial oversight to make sure that we are in lines with the budget that we have set forth in RTA, but also project delivery oversight. And there may be other roles as well. In the past, there were some subcommittees and some consideration of the CART's role in corridor planning. So that's kind of been its role in the past, but we want to make sure that we are preparing an environment that makes the CART successful moving forward and has a meaningful role in our process moving forward. So that's some of the thoughts. I don't know if Rick or staff, if you have anything else to add before we turn it over to get some feedback. Okay, with that, Mr. Chair, I think that's kind of our overview of that item, and we'd love to hear any feedback from the subcommittee on input of the CART and TMC moving forward.
Thanks, Dan. And I appreciate that overview. I was at the RTA board meeting. I think you captured the content that they discussed at that meeting. So let me open it up for committee members if you have any feedback, or members of the jurisdictional staff that are also on the call this morning. John?
Good morning, Carmine. Good morning, everyone. The only suggestion I'd have, and I heard it, I actually happened to tune into the CART meeting for a brief amount. I know they had a history under RTA 1 of having lacking quorum, so they rarely had an opportunity to meet to take actions. And so I think the group talked about a smaller committee, and I definitely think that's a recommendation worth pursuing.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. And Dan, I don't know if you know offhand or if your team does, is a quorum the number of total committee person, or is it the number of actually appointed and active? Because that sometimes can have an effect if you have vacancies and you're basing it on the full membership of the committee body, that could frustrate obtaining a quorum. So I'm just curious on that. As you look at the size of the committee and strategies to help ensure maintenance of a quorum, that may be something to consider.
Sure. That is a consideration for certain. With CART, presently, it needs 12, I believe, for a quorum, which is less than 50%, which is kind of the standard for most committees. But with that, the recommendation, what was discussed in the committee, was maybe a smaller committee, as John mentioned, moving forward. perhaps around 11, but certainly less than the number that they have today, which I think is in the low 30s.
Mr. Chair, I believe right now we have 20 active members on the CART. We had established through the bylaws a quorum of 12, but that was at a point in time when there were 28-ish members that were acting, and it was an attempt to try to make quorum more easily obtained.
Understood. All right, great. Any other comments from committee members here or any of the jurisdictional staff that are on?
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Just can somebody reconfirm for me who the CART makes the recommendations to, and do we want? So, well, that'll be my first question. Who is the CART making the recommendations directly to?
And I believe the intent, both in the past and moving forward, was that the CART would report directly to the board.
So, Mr. Chair, my question then is that does that make sense? I'm also basing some of this on some of the conversations that Catherine, Patrick, and Rick and I had yesterday, talking about going back to some of the, using the TPC and the TIP committee the way that we kind of originally intended them to be. That does it make sense for the CART to be making recommendations directly to the board, or should they be talking to the folks who are kind of on the front line and can maybe give them, a better explanation, kind of talk out, their recommendations and what those kind of direct impacts are on the specific projects? Are some of those recommendations doable, where the board maybe doesn't have some of those insights? So that's kind of my concern with the CART and what happens with their recommendations. And so, thanks.
Appreciate that, Beth. And I think, because there was some discussion by the RTA board about this, that they're going to have a preference on how to approach it. And I think we just ask staff to keep in mind that other committees could be helpful in reviewing recommendations and confirming sort of the feasibility of what's being suggested. I think the nature of the CART to provide some overall oversight and financial monitoring and input, the board may prefer to have them reporting, and the board can always ask that a matter be referred to a committee for technical input. And so, I think staff, if you would just keep in mind the feedback that the other committees could be helpful in both informing and validating input and recommendations from the CART. I think in the end, the RTA board is going to decide how they would like that reporting structure to be.
Beth and John, all great feedback. We'll report back on.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other hands up, Dan. So I'm okay moving on to item number 3, review of RTA administrative code and POPs. So looks like you, Jim, and Rick are going to lead that session for us.
And this was sent out late yesterday afternoon for our update. A couple of minor changes. Well, first, let me back up. So we have allotted significant time for this through 11:45 today. That's the main intent of today's meeting. So hopefully we can make through all of it, but if not, as much as we possibly can to stay on schedule. And as a reminder, as we go through this, the greens, these are items that we have already reached consensus on, and so we intend to skip over those today unless someone wants to bring something up that we've missed. The Bs are staff recommendations based on feedback that we've received from this subcommittee to date, or if it hasn't been discussed, our initial recommendation for your review. So hopefully these will be a little bit more straightforward, but some of them, of course, will require some discussion before we finalize. And then the Cs in yellow are needs discussion. We may have some preliminary feedback, but we really need some substantial input from this group to be able to make a clearer recommendation within the POPs and admin code. One other reminder, I just put it on the top right for us to refer back to as we're going through this. This is kind of the charge from our executive director, Mike Ortega, as we go through this process is, as we're going through this, does the change reflected help with project delivery? And does it help us to foster a stronger partnership moving forward? So maybe we can consider that as, guiding principles as we go through this all. So if we get stuck, maybe we could just refer back to that as a helping hand. And with that, Mr. Chair, we can move forward and jump right into it.
Yeah, Dan, I appreciate that. And, my thought would be for us to jump to the C's, the needs discussion. Those are going to have maybe some longer conversations. And I'd like to get through the ones that are more substantive early on when we're all fresh, and then we can roll to the staff recommendation ones unless somebody has a preference of doing that in the reverse order.
Mr. Chair, and we could get through the C's and then circle back to the B's. That's perfectly fine on our end.
Sounds good. Seeing no comments otherwise, let's dive in.
Okay, so Adam has filtered already, so we are starting with comment number 7. This came originally from the TMC, I believe, policy delivery related. The comment is, all cost savings realized through these proposed policy adjustments should be allocated to debt financing and contingency reserves. Suggested wording, any and all projects utilizing RTA funds in combination with other fund sources shall utilize the following priority programming and expenditure priority. 1, non-regional funds allocated to projects or programs with specific timing requests. 2, federal funds, grants, or region in accordance with the grant requirements or obligation timeframes. 3, regional HERF. 4, local funds committed by the ballot. 5, RTA funds. And below that, any unexpected RTA revenue remaining after project closeout shall be reallocated to the potential additional revenue sub-element as per direction from the TMC, incorporating recommendations from the TPC. So this is proposed for initial discussion. And Rick, if you'd like to add to this.
Mr. Chair, thanks, Dan. Just to give a little insight on this, to tag along with what Dan's saying, the idea on this was to address savings and revenue. We kind of had to set the stage so that RTA revenue is the most available flexible funding source and therefore would have to be remaining at the end. So that's why you see a hierarchy that would would start with programming and then expenditure would flow into that. So that's the logic and rationale of why you see programming kind of addressing savings reallocations. You have to set the stage for savings to be created, then to have that discussion.
Thanks, Rick, for that additional explanation. I see Paul's hands up. Paul, we're not hearing you. You're on mute.
I always like to practice first.
That's good.
What's the number one non-regional funds allocated to projects or programs with specific timing requests? The difference between that and the local funds committed by the ballot?
So we've had instances that at least I'm aware of when I was thinking about writing that is it could be grants. We lumped it all under the umbrella of non-regional. So grants, special state allocations, special discretionary allocations, congressional, it's all under that umbrella where there's a specific timing sequencing, must spend this first, that kind of logic. That's what it was intended to be.
Okay. And then my other comment would be that because we talked about 2 things in this, one is for going in and paying our debt financing and contingency reserves, we should probably set a percentage in this as well, like 50-50 or something like that, something that something that guides where that money is going to go.
So when we were looking at this and talking about it, that would be, we felt leaving it open-ended and going to TPC for recommendations to bring back before the TMC would open the door to all those conversations. And any and all
Okay.
possibilities could be on the table, unless you want to be prescriptive right off the bat and say, no, we do want to set policy guidelines right from the get-go.
No, I'll withdraw that. I see where you're going there.
Okay, I was going to say, if that makes sense, that was kind of the logic, is that could be the suggestion, discussion, that would be the forum, and allow those to happen at those committees.
Okay, thank you.
And Rick, just on that point, and I'm good with leaving the flexibility in there. As it reads, it says shall be reallocated to the potential additional revenue sub-element. So there's more than one additional revenue sub-element, correct?
Correct.
I mean, makes it sounds like there's a specific one or more of. There you go.
Yep. No, good catch on the wording. That was the intent, is they can go to any and all of those.
All right. And then it says, as per direction from TMC, incorporating recommendations from TPC. Does that mean that TMC is the final determiner, or does the RTA board have a role in where those monies are reallocated? Are we making a recommendation, right? Typically, TMC would be making a recommendation. So TPC input, recommendation, TMC review, and then recommendation to the RTA board.
That makes sense. I don't think we were prescriptive. Wanted to throw this down there and see how did this group feel about that. If it's more preferred that it comes from the board and direction at that level with recommendations from TPC and TMC, that's easy to accommodate.
Right. Catherine?
Thanks, Carmine. Just some clarification, I guess. 4 and 5. So local funds committed by ballot. I know that there's relatively few local funds on the ballot besides what the county is committed. I think Oro Valley has a couple million on projects. So is this saying that, our impact fees would be paid in full to the project before the RTA? Because I think that there should be proportionality to any funds that are listed in the ballot rather than having are exhausting, $9 million on a project and then, the RTA potentially saving a significant amount of money. And I also feel that since the county is almost the only entity that has local funds, it really is only applying to us, that concern.
Paul?
I was going to say, isn't that the way it is right now? I recall, we don't have a lot on the current RTA, but we had to exhaust our local match first, I believe.
We had a lot of proportional savings for projects where we brought in federal grants instead. So like the West Valencia Road, where we had a lot of STBG on it, we did both proportional spending of both local and RTA through the delivery of the project, as well as if there was any savings at the end. And I think that was the case with all of the county projects.
And I think that's why we kind of needed a discussion, because in order to reflect the comment and maximize the capability of the RTA funds that can be distributed broader than impact fees, which may be limited to a roadway project or specific corridor, this could be diverted to any and all program aspects of it. So there was greater flexibility. So maximizing that would require not a proportionate drain, but a drain all of the sources first mentality. But that's the discussion and for the decision for this group. But that was the logic, Catherine. That was the thinking, if that answers your question.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, Catherine, the circumstance you described, right, is very specific. Is that the primary instance or method where there may be a shifting in the proportionality and therefore, right, so if a grant is received and those dollars are applied, then readjusting other proportional funds at some percentage, right, some relative percentage basis, is that the sole instance
I don't believe it was the sole instance. Both in RTA 1 and RTA Next, the counties had the biggest portion of local funding going, like that is listed on the ballot to projects. So because we had, tens of millions of bond funding as well as tens of millions of impact fees in RTA 1. And so we were pretty consistent in terms of applying the local funds and the RTA funds kind of proportionally as the project marches along, rather than front loading with all of the bond or front loading with all of the impact fees and then grabbing the RTA at the end. So end of day, did the project turn out that there was more savings on one hand than the other? I would have to go back and do the analysis, but it created a situation where at least we were both having an even spend rate for the funds that we oversee.
So the idea, Rick, being that if there are savings because new funding sources became available, that there be a proportional benefit both to the local agency and the RTA.
That's how I'm hearing the suggestion, but that's not how, so we'd have to rewrite or we modify the writing to capture that. That's not, the writing intended to capture the comment, or I should say address the comment, was that you would have then whatever leftover revenue would be in the RTA arena only. Therefore, the maximum discretion for adjusting, reprogramming, reallocating where necessary. Whereas if you cut that down because there's proportional sharing, then those savings may not be able to be reallocated. So we can change it. I don't think there was any particular passion or prejudice from this end. It was trying to be respectful of the comment, though, and that seemed to set the stage for it. So if there's a desire to go down the path as Catherine is describing, we can change that wording up accordingly. If that's where the committee wants to go.
I think it could be just inserting of another sentence that says if additional sources of funding, right, are produced, that then the amounts, right, the savings, so to speak, right, get applied proportionally. I'm just throwing that out there, but Paul has his hand up. I don't think it requires a complete rewrite. It may be just the inserting of a sentence if the group is okay with it. So Paul?
I just throwing something on the wall here. What about on that distribution between 4 and 5? That's also a TPC, TMC, and board decision. But I understand the fairness that Catherine is referring to.
Beth?
I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with making it a TPC, TMC board decision, rather than kind of specifying it in the policy, because I think one of the problems we have is people being like fair and consistent, and we're talking about a 20-year program, and getting to the end of the program and somebody being like, hey, 20 years ago there was cost savings and I didn't get, we didn't get proportional shares back, but now somebody's getting all their money back. So I'm just looking at something maybe to be more fair and consistent.
Appreciate that, Beth. I mean, I would tend to agree on that if we just indicate, that, the savings, I'm using this term savings, right? The reduction in need, right? If additional sources of funding are produced, then the reduction in the other sources of needed funds would be applied proportionally.
Just across the local and the RTA, correct? We would still intend to deplete regional, federal sources, all that stuff. So the proportionality would only apply the local contribution and the RTA funds. Is that correct? Am I picking up on that?
Yeah, let me go to Beth and then ask Catherine, if she had further thought on that question, Rick.
Sorry, my hand was just still up from last time.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, Catherine, you introduced the idea. So does that work that it be applied to the local and RTA funds, the proportional reduction?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's really, I think the proportionality is to those things that are listed in the ballot. And if we are successful at getting grants or other types of funding and applying them to the project, I agree, those should be spent first. But it's what we're saying in the ballot now based on estimates, we're committing they should get proportional savings. So I think we're there.
One that jumped to mind would be like the 5 interchanges, if they come in cheaper by some miracle. So the proportionate one would also apply to the RAC funds then. So that in theory, then the region gets better ability to reevaluate where that could go. Is that still thinking, or is that still line with your thinking, that scenario?
Yes, because I mean, I think that's going to be a complex issue. If it comes in higher, then we may or may not have enough match, and we'll be pulling other money to match the RAC fund. So,
Okay, nope,
I mean, I think that one, if we face it, is going to be a lot more complex, and we'll
got it,
need to know the case by case of it.
got it. Okay.
Mr. Chair, we had one more comment internally, if that's okay, Jamie?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan, Mr. Chair. So as I was hearing the conversation, I think we were talking about the first section too of that cell in terms of the expenditure priority. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I thought I was hearing that local funds 4 and 5 could be expended or drawn down proportionately, because this text that's being added is about additional funding. So I just wanted to clarify, are we also talking about the expenditure priority of 4 and 5?
That's correct. It would have to apply there because we wouldn't know what leftover funds are available till it's done. So the prioritization and the expenditure of it would follow in line with this prorated balance or prorated approach, so that when we have savings left over, we've then employed that practice, and we now can say we have XYZ in local funds and XYZ in regional funds. We can only reallocate the regional funds at the discretion of. So yeah, this would apply to expenditure as well. But I think the scenario was talked about is if something comes along to introduce another source that allows that capability, or money's dropped out, or we get better than expected, whatever that generates revenue, our expenditure would have to create that scenario as well and leave that.
Yeah, and I'm okay unless there's further discussion, letting staff, think through this and come back with, further staff recommendation on it. I think you've sort of captured the thinking here of the discussion, and it may require you all to double check to make sure that we've got it appropriately crafted so that it includes what's intended, and then to think through any unintended consequences before we give a final nod to it.
Works.
Okay, everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
All right, and Fausto, I know your hand went up and then went back down. Did you have some other thoughts to add?
Well, Rick had brought it up in regards to the interchange. I was having some similar thoughts on how that's going to look, obviously with the RTA and we'll call it local funds, the ADOT funds, and the town is currently working on an RCE grant, and we'll continue to pursue that, I imagine, in the future, and or in coordination with ADOT. So just be mindful of the interchanges.
Excellent. All right, thanks.
One thing I'm going to circle back on, Carmine, you'd suggested, I guess I didn't hear anybody opposed to it, that it would actually be approved by board, recommendations from TPC and TMC. So we wanted to change that wording as well, that the board is the approval of the authority. Does the group agree with that as well?
I mean, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and all for the discussion. I think we have some clear directions. We can come back with any revisions after reviewing. We move on to the next comment. Okay, would you mind just scrolling to the left so I can let them know which one it is? Okay, this is comment number 22, originally from Oro Valley. This is page 3, item 9 in the POPs regarding soft costs. Comment, maybe there should be an agency reimbursement limit set for each project as a percentage of the overall cost. Staff recommendation is to consider aligning this with the process identified for comment number 80. And we can, oh, might have to unhide for that, sorry. We will pull that up in just a moment so we could reference that. And that process, which we had discussed in our last meeting, is outlined here. Generally, it mentions projects needing additional funding to deliver shall utilize the following process. And we have a 3-step process for us to do that. So that is the thought. Bring it back to Oro Valley, Mr. Chair, or others to see if that addresses the concern or if we need to consider something else.
Sure, let's maybe start with Paul, since that comment came from Oro Valley, then we can open it up to others.
I was going to say, if we get back to number 80, let me digest that again.
Sure.
I think it addresses what we were talking about. Project funding.
So I think, Paul, it's treated like anything else where, there may be cost overruns in a line item. Is, you've got to try and absorb them by making adjustments elsewhere. And if not, you've got to go through a process to address it. So, we talked about that with art. We talked about it with landscaping. This would be another similar one, right? If you're chewing up a big piece of the overall funding with soft costs, the expectation is that you're offsetting that somewhere else. And if not, then there's a process by which you have to go through a review and clearance on that.
And I think the previous comment was simply on, what that, if there is indeed an overrun, how's that handled? I don't see any reason to expand any further on that.
All right, let me go to Sam.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Carmine. I'm struggling with the idea of mixing the sides of the house with the committees. And maybe this is just like how I like to organize things in my brain, but we talk about using TPC, which is on the PAG side of the house, to make recommendations at TMC, which is on the RTA side of the house. And I'm just curious if there's any concerns with that, or should there be, I don't know. I've always kind of struggled with that relationship and how things should flow up and down through the committee structure.
Yeah. Sam, before I leave off to another member, do you have a recommendation if it's not TPC?
Well, I think I support the idea of engaging TPC more in some of these conversations and decisions. I don't know if there needs to be an equivalent committee on the RTA side of the house, so then it really does flow up through to TMC and then to the board, or is it okay to just cross back and forth? I guess that's more of a question.
All right. Well, others may have answers to it. I'll go Catherine, John, and then Paul.
I was just going to mention, again, early days, TPC, if you looked at the committee, description, that little packet with it, TPC was an RTA and a PAG committee. And then in more recent years, they eliminated the RTA part of it. So it never gavelled out and gavelled in like the other ones that have the same membership. And if that's necessary, that's necessary. But it was still the same folks having the conversations and making the recommendations.
Appreciate that, Catherine. And so Dan and staff, I mean, that could be a simple fix to the question that Sam raised, but let's see what others might think. John?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little concerned about adding CART in the process of recommendations on an item like this. I think we're talking more technical terms of why we overran perhaps, or what design standards might have changed. I think CART has a good role, but I don't think this is one role where we ought to include them. The TPC for sure, because they're doing the programming of the funding. That's my suggestion.
All right. Thanks, John. We'll go to Paul and then let staff maybe comment on some of the points that were raised.
I agree with John and Catherine that the TPC is really the experts. When it gets to the TMC, that's town managers who are being fed the answer from their experts at the TPC. I mean, at the end of the day. So I think the TPC plays a very important role with RTA and making decisions like this to kind of have that filter up. And then and then I agree with John too. I don't think the CART has a place here.
Thanks, Paul. Beth?
Agree with everything that Paul and John just said.
Excellent. All right. So I think staff, two themes that you heard there, maybe having TPC be both PAG and an RTA committee, and then leaving the recommendation, right, as part of this process with TMC. You know, the CART, you know, may have other roles in a broader context, right? This seems to be very detail driven, project by project, what we're talking about here. And so maybe from that perspective, doesn't warrant running it through CART in addition to TMC. So as you're sort of reimagining, right, what CART, their role is, maybe it is at a higher level than what this is involving.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and all for that discussion. That was all great feedback, and we'll circle back and discuss that internally and follow up with a revised recommendation there based on the feedback we received.
Excellent. Thank you. So I think when we roll back up the item relative to soft costs, we've sort of resolved that as recommended by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, I believe we can move on. Thank you, Adam. I think the next C is comment number.
Mike has his hand up.
Oh,
hey,
I'm sorry.
Carmine, before you move on, I just wanted to give you all a thought on the CART and their engagement. I don't disagree with you in terms of the detail. But I also think that we should leave them in as a possible, because I can think of instances where we may want to engage them. I wouldn't necessarily put them in the mix as another stop, if you will, or another reviewer. But I do think that we should at least have the opportunity as we're going through to engage them. And I think that if we're smart about their role, they can be very useful in terms of the public perspective and oversight of whatever the issue might be. And so I would suggest to you that instead of just suggesting we're not going to, or that we're going to engage them on all components, that we maybe think about that. So I just throw that out to you because as I've watched this evolution, I think that there could be value there, I guess, in terms of non-technical perspectives on some of these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, appreciate that, Mike. And I think, you know, you're in the process, the team is in the process of coming up with what the new structure for CART looks like. And so I think we should keep this in the mix, that they may be asked to weigh in on something. I heard you say it doesn't need to be a stop along the way in every instance, but preserving the ability in certain circumstances to consult with CART. Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you for that, Mike and Mr. Chair. With that, I believe we can move on to comment number 29. This is from Oro Valley related to right-of-way. Should residential parcels be handed straight back to the RTA if RTA funds are used for the acquisition? And the recommendation is, one, we'll need to go back and review the RTA's acquisitions manual and also consult with Mike Ortega as this evolves with as far as RTA's role and report back. But initially, our suggested wording is for any and all property acquisitions using RTA funds, the following shall apply. 1, at the conclusion of a project, any surplus property shall be retained by the owning jurisdiction with all rights and obligations being the responsibility of the owning jurisdiction. 2, any financial proceeds resulting from a sale of property purchased with RTA funds shall be available to the owning jurisdiction for use on RTA eligible projects or programs. We'll open that up for discussion. Sorry, Rick, did you have anything to follow up before we do?
Just the only thing, Carmine and all, it kind of deviates from what we're doing now, and it was felt that it could be more of an incentive there, that if the jurisdiction says, okay, we get the benefits of the proceeds of the sale, there may be more of a compelling benefit that would, or I'm sorry, more of a compelling need that would actually benefit that jurisdiction. So felt that that would be an incentive. That's why that's introduced versus what's kind of in there now. So just that little inside clarification is what we're proposing.
Sure. Mike, you had some additional input?
Yeah, so keep in mind that the RTA isn't interested in owning property long-term. I mean, the RTA is really interested in the proceeds from that. And so I would suggest that the focus is on disposal or basically selling whatever that property is. And I think that whatever incentive we come up with for the jurisdictions to basically transfer that property to private ownership and obviously sell it, those proceeds going back to the RTA, which is that second bullet point. But when that happens becomes the key, right? And so I think those are the types of things that we're trying to identify and really tighten up a little bit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Beth?
So I guess my one question is the wording of shall be available as opposed to maybe shall be utilized by. Because it's great that they're available, but that means, at least the way that that's worded to me, it means that a jurisdiction could just sell the property and keep the funds and not use them for an RTA project. That if you do sell them during the, during the project life, that it should be used for the project.
Good correction. Thank you.
Go to John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little concerned about item 1 in the language about the owning jurisdiction, retaining rights and responsibilities. I mean, I get it. That's the way it really works. But I think we need an encouragement to dispose of those properties, as Mr. Ortega was saying, because, oftentimes you end up with slivers of leftover property that are not even thought of for any length of time. They're just pushed aside. And I think there has to be some incentive to try and get those properties out to the market and get rid of them. So I don't know that one doesn't contradicts that necessarily, but I'm just suggesting that maybe we need a language in here that says, there'll be efforts expended to dispose of the property as diligently as possible.
So John, let me try and address that for the benefit of the group, because you raise up the questions we talked about as well. And the idea with number 1 was to get to what Mike was talking about, that it won't be RTA's ownership. The jurisdiction that gets it is going to have ownership, maintenance, and responsibilities of that as surplus property. That's their property to do. RTA is not in that business. The second part was to try and address and that's what we're proposing, but if you feel it needs to be strengthened, we can. But that was the idea, is that the owning jurisdiction is able to get the benefits and the proceeds now incorporating Beth's suggestion that we utilize it, not just make it available, but it's actually then plugged into RTA programs, other projects, other needs as see fit. So that was the incentive rather than coming back to the big giant RTA pool where it may go to another jurisdiction. It's actually more incentivizing to say, hey, you had surplus funding from this sale within this jurisdiction and you get to retain that benefit. So those are the two statements, and that's the insight behind those two statements, if that clarifies, John.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I guess what I'm recalling is that the county had some involvement in, maybe it was a joint project or something, but where another jurisdiction owned the property and wasn't taking action to dispose of it. And so I know the county was looking for some funds to be returned to them, and that didn't happen for quite some time. So that's the only kind of encouragement I was looking for.
Paul?
Yeah, I think I'm the author of this. The sole reason that we created this comment was based upon all this property disposition we've been dealing with from RTA 1 here at the 12th hour, and that one, I don't agree with number one. That feels to me like a windfall. We have a program in totality here, and I understand what Mike is saying. It's not the RTA's position to want to own any property whatsoever. I get that. But there's going to be different properties that have different uses at the end. So you have a sliver of property left. It might be absolutely useless, have no monetary value whatsoever. Well, maybe that can be transferred over to the jurisdiction if they want that, or possibly sold to an adjacent property owner. But if it is indeed sold, those revenues return back to the RTA. And because, I mean, we still have to deal with debt service. We still have to deal with contingency. It's a 20-year plan. We should have a path of the disposition of that property at the time that property is disposed of. And that's the purpose of the comment, is to not wait to the very end and try to figure out what are we going to do with all these remnant parcels, and could everybody make an accounting of what you have and what you did, and go back to, trying to scramble around and deal with this at the very end.
It would come back to the RTA, not to the jurisdiction. So it's back to the larger pool.
Yeah, and I only say that because there's, like I said, there's remnant property that can be developed, per local code, or it's close enough that it can be developed but non-conforming per whatever zoning is available right there. But there are some properties where there's just absolutely there's no use for whatsoever. That might be able to be sold to, at a very discounted rate, sold to an adjacent private property owner, but it'll still generate revenue. And all I'm saying is all that revenue, in my mind, needs to go back to the RTA. RTA paid for it in the first place. RTA should be the recipient of that, unless we look at that proportionality that Catherine mentioned earlier. Maybe a portion to the jurisdiction, a portion to the RTA, based on the proportionality of who's providing the funding.
Catherine?
I think I'm, kind of I agree with Paul. Like, this money should go back to the RTA. It's a cost savings in some way. I mean, we've spent the money and then we didn't need to spend the RTA money. We were reimbursed. It should go into the big pot. And I think what it sounds like we're trying to do is incentivize disposing of this property, figuring out what that final disposition is going to be as soon as possible once the project is complete. Mm-hmm. So maybe it would be advantageous to add a time frame to this, or add it to a closeout requirement for a project, or something that is more time bound. If that's what the end goal is, to collect whatever revenues we can. And I agree with Paul. I mean, if it's a sliver, there's very little you can do with that unless the neighbor wants to buy it for their own lot. And that's challenges we have all over the place. But I think it's I think it gets really tricky. I mean, like if you sold a bunch of properties along a major corridor and made $20 million, could that then go to a program in a different category of RTA next? Is that what's being suggested? I just think number two provides too much flexibility, and that might not be appropriate.
Just a couple of thoughts. I mean, it sounds like there's three components of this. At the conclusion of the project, that reasonable attempts be made to go ahead and sell the surplus property. And that until such time that the surplus property is held or sold, who holds it? Who owns it, right? Is that the jurisdiction or the RTA? And then what happens with the proceeds if it's sold, right? So, at closeout, that reasonable attempt has to be made. And if it's within a time period, so be it, right, to sell the property. And that the jurisdiction retains it until such time that that sale occurs. And then the proceeds go back into the RTA pool. If it's not sold, then what happens to it? Does the jurisdiction retain it, or does it go to the RTA? And we heard RTA is not interested in owning property, no less unusable portions of property. So that's just sort of my thinking. But let me go to some others. Beth.
Suggest something that's probably going to not be very well received. That, to your point, that the RTA doesn't want to own property. So when a jurisdiction's trying to close out a project, if they still have property that hasn't been sold but is usable, is viable pieces of property, do they essentially pay back the RTA fair market value for, get the property appraised, fair market value? And then in the future, if they sell it, that's great. If they keep it, that's great. But they've returned the fair market value of the remaining property to the RTA and they close out that property. And then who cares, that they own it and what they use it for in the future or don't use it for in the future. My suggestion.
Thanks, Beth. Fausto?
I guess along the similar lines of what Beth mentioned, I was just questioning if there needs to be some sort of assessment of the property, which again, she just mentioned that, doing some type of evaluation of it. The other question is, we talked about potentially giving it back to the RTA. Is the RTA able to then do something with that property? Are they set up to be able to do the logistics and to then sell the property or do all the other items that come into play with that? I think that adds another nuance to it.
Indeed, right? So when there's trash dumped on it, who's cleaning it up? Mike?
I'll call you, Carmine. You can bring your pickup and help me clean it up. So a couple
I
thoughts.
don't have a pickup. You do. a rather nice classic one. So
hey, we'll hook up a trailer to your Mustang, Carmine.
all right.
Hey, so here's a thought, sort of back to what Beth said. So first of all, let me address Fausto's comment. The RTA is not in the business of owning property. Okay. So we aren't really set up to own or manage property long term. We can, however, own property as it relates to helping the delivery of projects and the program. So, I mean, we do have a mechanism for that, but that's not really the primary role. But what I was thinking as I was hearing the debate or the conversation, I think that there's a way to maybe identify value of that property and then basically say, okay, that property is worth X. And so you, jurisdiction, now have X value. And so what you choose to do that with that is up to you. But that credit goes back to the RTA for future reimbursement or future payments. I'm not trying to complicate it, but I'm just thinking that that might be a simpler way to do that, so that we can identify value of that property. And then quite frankly, if it's sold down the road, we can settle up if it's off a little bit one way or the other, but at least it keeps it on the books. Because I think if you recall, there was a lot of conversation early on, 3 months ago, about remnant parcels, and it was this big nugget that was out there, and we found out it really wasn't. But ultimately, I think there's a conversation that can be had about, okay, that is an IOU, if you will, and I would agree that it should go to the RTA pot as a whole, that can then be distributed back, how whatever is, whatever process is appropriate. But it would seem to me that that might be a way to just say that there's value, here it is, and then we're off to the races. Thanks, Carmine.
Thank you, Mike. John?
Yeah, thanks, Carmine. I'm thinking that the combination of Beth's thought and Catherine's time thought could get us there. In other words, yes, you make an assessment at closeout that you've got certain properties in the sponsoring jurisdiction's hands, and there might be some way of establishing a timeline that they would dispose of it and return the funds, or as Beth suggested, pay back the RTA. I guess what my question is, don't we have any real world examples of this? For example, on Broadway, the city project? Anybody from staff?
Yeah, I'm here. I kind of chuckle, John, because that was atypical. Because there was a three-way agreement between the city, RTA, and Rio Nuevo on what to do with those properties. So I don't know if we want to use Broadway as a good example. Other than I will say Broadway is a good example of where we found an opportunity to partner and redevelop some of those properties for a higher value.
Right.
But that's, yeah. The only other one that I have a lot of remnant parcels on is going to be Grant Road, but that's in progress right now. I shouldn't say a lot of remnant. We know there will be remnant right away after we're all said and done.
So
Gotcha, Sam. Thanks.
I like the idea that, John just offered, that closeout, and I think it was part and parcel of some of the other comments as well. But as part of closeout, there's an assessment done. And if there's no marketable value to it, maybe it stays with the jurisdiction. If there is marketable value to it, then reasonable efforts have to be made to sell it. And if in the end it's not sold and the jurisdiction ends up retaining it, that then there's a making whole of RTA right for the value of that property.
I would say there's two components of value. There's an assessed value, and then there's a real value. The real value is the market is going to market.
Right.
And if nobody bites, well, then that's your answer. That's the value of the parcel is zero.
Okay.
In which case, it can be just disposed of. Like, for instance, if we had a sliver of property in Oro Valley that was absolutely useless for anything, and we didn't want to maintain it and keep it, we would approach the property owner. Hey, do you want this? Because there is a process for disposition of property that has no value, which an adjacent landowner can petition and receive it.
Yeah, and just one other aspect of this. I mean, we're talking a lot about sale. Is there a lease arrangement? I mean, sometimes property may be leasable, right, for use there. So you could have an arrangement where it's not sold, but it's leased to a user, not to complicate things further. Beth?
I just want to caution something that what Paul said, though, is that if it goes to market and nobody buys it, then that means it's useless. Grant Road Phase 2, the city ended up buying a Morisco's, And it took a really long time to sell that property because it was so specific that it had been a restaurant. And, you know, the reason that they ended up having to acquire the whole business is it lost all its parking. So reselling, just because nobody, originally, bit at it, didn't make it a useless piece of property. So I want to just caution saying, oh, well, we went to market, nobody wanted it, and now it has a zero value, because it did eventually, get sold and reused. It just took a really long time. So just throwing that out there.
So staff, you've heard a lot of conversation. I don't think we're going to resolve this fully today. Might be beneficial for you all to maybe marinate on what you heard today and come back. I think some form of, there's an assessment done at closeout, and that if it's determined there's no marketable value to it, then it stays in the hands of the jurisdiction, right? If there is marketable value, then a reasonable attempt be made, or reasonable attempts to address what Beth just noted be made. And maybe there has to be some periodic reporting back to the RTA on efforts to try and sell the property. And then, at some point, if it is concluded that it's not able to be sold, then there be some form of reimbursement by the jurisdiction back to RTA. I mean, it creates uncertainty. None of us like uncertainty. None of us like costs to come at us at future points that we didn't fully anticipate or budget for. So I think maybe if you all can use what you've heard today and come back with some other language to maybe address it, that might be the best way to handle this. Beth, did you have your hand up?
No, I just keep forgetting to put it down. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we're good.
And Carmine, the only other thing I heard that everybody agreed on, or I think everybody agreed on, was it goes back to the big RTA pot, not the jurisdiction's allocation as we had laid out.
That's what I had heard.
Yeah, I didn't hear anybody that was against that. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll go back and make some revisions based on that and all the discussion that we just had. Okay. All right, moving on. The next one is very similar. This one coming from City of Tucson, though, related to exaction. So this is to clarify, suspect this is referencing tools like the City of Tucson's MSR, which may require right-of-way dedications with development projects. That was on the POPs.
Number 30?
Yeah, comment number 30, and that's page 4 on the POPs, item number 11. And yeah, we can go to that real quick in the POPs, just so everyone can see it. Page 4, item 11. Okay, so to read it real quick, it is the policy, sorry. Thank you, Adam. It is the policy of the RTA board that a corridor study resulting in an adopted right-of-way plan and or inclusion of a corridor in an adopted major street and roadway plan is required for reimbursement of any right-of-way acquisition using RTA funding, and that once such an alignment is established and approved by jurisdictional governments. It is also the policy of the RTA board to encourage jurisdictions to use their powers to exaction to the extent possible to acquire needed rights of way for RTA project. So Sam or anyone from the City of Tucson, I'm not sure if you wanted to clarify the question, having gone through it again.
This question was provided by James Castaneda. He's on the call.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. The question was really just a confirmation. I was in reading through it, unsure what exaction referred to, and kind of doing some additional research. It sounded like something similar to what we have for our major streets and routes plan. I think the county has something similar where rights of way are required to be dedicated at the time of development. So it was really just a clarification point for other city staff when reviewing that. But that last sentence about encouraging jurisdictions to use their powers to exaction to the extent possible, I was just curious if other jurisdictions have mechanisms similar and if that needs to be stated, because I believe the city and the county are already actively doing that through policies like a major streets and routes plan.
Thank you, James. Yeah, so I know in the county we have processes and requirements in place with certain development approvals for dedication of right-of-way. I think the other thing that comes to mind here is that there may be instances where we have to condemn property, and that might be necessary in order for a project to move forward. And so I would interpret that last sentence broadly to include any regulatory requirements that jurisdictions have in place, plus then our authority to condemn property for public purpose. Paul?
I was going to say in Oro Valley, it's been a more ad hoc. We've had the opportunity to, through plating processes, make those exactions, because most plating in our town is accompanied by rezoning. So that's where that rolls in. We're very hesitant to do that condemnation, as a taking. And I can't think of a time that the town has actually had to exercise that.
And I think there's language in here that says to the extent possible, right? So I think that would allow jurisdictions to follow their adopted practices and follow, what you're saying, Paul, is that, through the legislative process, right, they go and they ask for a land use change. You're making a condition of that land use change that they provide a dedication. And so, you're not fond of condemnation, understood that. I think the language says to the extent possible and gives you that flexibility. Beth?
I just wanted to share that the town of Sarita, we do have an MSNR. We do have the power to condemn. And similar to Oro Valley, we typically don't like to throw around the condemnation word. And I think in most cases, we haven't had to do that. But we do have the ability to do it if necessary. So.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, and I think, that's a tool of last resort. I don't think any of us like to engage that way. We try to negotiate the reasonable acquisition through other means. So, all right. I think, this conversation puts some clarity to that. Unless Sam or James or Patrick, you have any need to further discuss this, we can just sort of mark it as concluded.
I agree, Carmine. I think you've addressed the question that we had. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Okay, we'll move on to comment number 32. This is from the City of Tucson, page 4, related to design standards. The comment is, add a new policy recommending that projects should be designed under the jurisdictional adopted policies, procedures, standards, and or guidelines in effect at initiation of the project or project phase. And we'd like to refer you to the response to comment 3 and confirm if that addresses that particular comment. So again, the staff recommendation is to revise item number 23 in section 1.0. Eligible engineering items may exceed jurisdictional minimum standards and budget percentage thresholds when considering context, safety, and community support without board approval if additional costs are within the approved budget as identified in the RTA plan. However, whenever practical, it's the policy of the board to conserve valuable resources during all phases of project delivery. So the original policy item was specific just to that last sentence. the rest of this was discussed at our last meeting, and this is what we captured as the agreement to that.
I think that addresses our concern here. It just, the way I read this is that as long as you're within the project budget, you're good to go. I just want to make sure that we have the flexibility to follow some of our mayor and council approved policies as it relates to roadway design.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Patrick's on the call, may have been his comment. Patrick, do you think that staff recommendation there addresses our concern?
I think so. I just wanted to make sure we have that flexibility. We've seen a slate of national manuals get updated in the last couple of years, and I would fully anticipate that happen again within the life cycle of this. So to kind of hold these projects to the constraints of the HDR estimates that were done in 2024 when we're in 2040 may not be appropriate. So just having that flexibility in there, knowing that the profession evolves. I assume that cost estimate would be reflective of the inflation. I know that's captured elsewhere in this, so it's not to that ballot amount, but making sure we are accounting for those natural cost increases.
Correct. And that'll be reviewed, I believe, on an annual basis and throughout the process.
Great, thank you.
All right. So I think we can change number 3, from staff recommendation to consensus reached.
Will do.
And then also the item that we were just addressing below.
That was 32. Great. Okay, with that, we can just taking a note here. I believe our next discussion item is 47, unless another yellow pops up before that. There it is. Okay, the original comment came from the City of Tucson relating to transit on page 6 of the POPs, item 17T. Verify bus stop and bus stop maintenance is captured here. Before the recommended wording there, we did go back and verify that bus maintenance is eligible under 485304. So just wanted to confirm that. And the recommended wording is bus shelters, including all appurtenances, that's a tough word, appurtenances, such as benches, bike racks, trash receptacles, etc., to ensure full functionality.
That works for us. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments there, or we're good? Okay.
Okay, next item is comment number 55. This was originally from Curtis related to project implementation. The comment was direct involvement by the RTA in any phase of project implementation shall be included in the IGA as amended. Direct involvement includes, but is not limited to, right-of-way acquisition, planning, engineering, utility coordination, construction, and construction management. And our initial response is that we'll need to discuss this a little bit more. We're in the process of looking at what our organization looks like strategically moving forward, presuming things are successful in March, and what our role could be. But as an initial response to that, we could defer back to our response to comment number 27 real quick. And that response is, as part of the overall commitment to enhanced program delivery, project involvement, including key roles and responsibilities by other member jurisdictions and or RTA team members, will be defined in the IGA, which we feel captures this comment. Rick, did you have a follow-up on that?
Yep. The intent on that was to try and, rather than try to cover every single scenario, every single opportunity, every single possibility now, have those discussions at the time delivery and assess that with the owning jurisdiction. So that's why you see it such a open-ended, is to retain that flexibility so that that conversation could take place in its entirety.
And Mike, are you still on? There was some discussion and action taken by the RTA board, right, giving you the ability to move forward to secure some contracted resources. Does that relate to what we're talking about here, or how does that potentially relate to what we're talking about?
So the RTA board gave me authorization to move with some contracted services, but really not on the macro level project delivery. It was more specific to right-of-way acquisition and some of the things that we're looking at to help and facilitate right-of-way. Ultimately, I do expect that we probably will get into that level of detail, but at this point, I don't have that authorization.
Okay, so this could though be a model, right? A scalable approach to
That's
doing
correct.
some of the very things that are being addressed here.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So then this one, I think, anybody have any feedback on the approach here that's being used? It'll be defined on an IGA level basis, I think conceptually, right? Everyone's in agreement that yes, where advantageous and mutually agreed upon between the jurisdiction and the RTA could take on roles in the area of acquisition, right-of-way acquisition, engineering design, utility coordination, the items that are listed there. Anybody have any thoughts contrary to that? Okay, so I think we have consensus. We need, I don't think we need to flesh it out further at this point.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, we'll move on to comment number 58 from Oro Valley. This is page 9B of the POPs related to major changes. Need to elaborate on major in terms of major changes to projects in the RTA plan. And we're suggesting that we follow the process that we outlined in responses to numbers 80 and 83 as a means to address scope changes.
Dan, can you show us what that item is in the POPs?
Sure. It's 9B.
As the author, I was looking for quantification.
Oh, major changes. Okay, inform stakeholders and public on major changes to projects in the RTA plan.
Yeah, what's a major change?
So Dan, can you show us what we've got in 80 and 83, or the staff recommendation for 80 and 83?
Sure. So again, 80 is related to projects needing additional funding to deliver. And so this addresses the process. If there is a major change that results in additional funding need, this is the process that we follow. It doesn't address, to Paul's comment, to define what a major change is, but really, regardless of what that definition is, this is the process that would be followed. And then for 83, the suggested wording here is any and all projects utilizing RTA funding shall not perform any redesign activities, especially any modifications to scope or concept after the project has received approval of the design concept report or DCR or achieved the 30% design milestone. Exceptions will be subject to approval by the TMC. So the idea here is that we would do more upfront work to make sure that the scopes are locked in by that 30% or DCR level to help avoid scope changes. But should there be scope changes, we would have a process to follow through our committee structure, is the idea, as outlined in the previous response.
Okay, so maybe before going to some others, let me stick with Paul for a second and get a reaction. I mean, one thought in that language, what if there was a major change incorporated within the 30% design milestone that didn't trigger a financial change, but there was something large that was different from what was included in the ballot? And now I'll just let that question linger out there while we go let me go back to Paul and then I'll go Beth, and it looks like staff has a hand up as well.
Yeah, this all kind of boils down to what the ballot language is promising the public. And is that what we consider a major change? Like I said, looking for quantification, not the process. I think we're all good on the process here. That's been kind of um, mulled over many times. But maybe the definition of that is, a major change is anything that deviates from the ballot language.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Beth?
Well, so I have a couple concerns here because there are certain things that might be a major change that, I mean, our ballot language isn't very specific on some of our projects. So that the language that you just scrolled away from, it talked about any modification after the 30%. And I guess I have a little bit of a concern of, small changes that might happen after 30%, like, hey, after 30%, when we were doing our cost estimates and we realized that using one size storm drain, was way too expensive, and we're changing the size because it actually saves us money, but we did it after 30%. Does that have to go back through the whole process? I would argue no. Or things like changing a structural section on your roadway, that could have cost implications, but is that something that needs to go back? Is that a major change, even if it costs, a little bit more money? And again, if it costs more money, but you find a savings somewhere else, or, I mean, what's the trigger? It's $2 over. We need to go get approval. That we could have a lot of things, appearing, before all the, these groups needing approval that really don't need to. So to Paul's point, kind of clarifying a little bit, if it's $1, it's $1, and that means it has to go back through, and we're all good with that. But I just want to make sure that we at least have that conversation ahead of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Beth. I'm going to go back to Paul because I think his comment maybe relates to something Beth said, and then I'll go to staff. I haven't lost track that your hand is up, staff.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that Beth was saying here is that, and again, hence the reason for the comment is that, a quantification and what does that major change mean? So that we aren't dealing with nickel and diming. And I think we discussed it in the process very well before, that if things don't affect the budget, changes can happen. As long as it meets minimum thresholds, of course. But again, to Beth's point, you got to change. You had a dry crossing that now has to be an over/under crossing. But if it's still passable, that still meets the intent of the ballot language. I just wanted to again throw in there where that quantification is, because right now it's just way too open-ended, and it's is it $1? Is it $1 million? Where does that lie? And I think at the end of the day, even though that the ballot language isn't terribly specific, but if we change anything that we promised the public, we do value engineering that, we promised them 6 lanes and we go to 4 lanes. I use the classic First Avenue. Well, after evaluation, we find out that the 4 lanes will work just as well, if not better, and cost the public less. That's a major change. That should probably go back through the process. Determining whether a crossing is dry or not, in my mind, is not a major change, because as long as it's still passable, it meets that requirement. So that's what I throw on the table.
All right, thanks for that, Paul. I'm going to go to staff, and Beth, I'll come back to you.
A couple of things that might be helpful from a statutory perspective is that there actually are provisions in there that identify, because this is basically about identifying or notifying the public. The statute actually makes reference to if certain projects reach certain expenditure thresholds, or that the cost of the project is assumed to go over. This is it's difficult because it can be confused with the substantial change clause, which really is operating at an elemental level. But on the financial side, I guess my major point is there are statutory provisions that do say these are the exceedances that trigger a requirement to notify the public every year, in fact. As far as the spirit and intent of the project descriptions, I think that could go a long way to satisfy, how fine a point we put on project changes from a scope perspective. But just wanted to offer that up. The statute does address the financials pretty significantly. We could probably look to make references to those specific statutes, and that might satisfy maybe the question that's being put forward.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Dan. May I just add one more item real quick?
Yes.
Paul had mentioned, defining major changes as things that deviate from the ballot language. Going back to the root of the comment, if we were to do that in the definitions, would that address the overall concern here?
It may. Let me take. Oh, Beth, your hand went down. So I think clearly, right, some greater specificity in defining what those changes are, and it sounds like from a financial standpoint, right, which we just heard from staff, there's some guardrails, right, that we have to meet statutorily. So, right, what does it look like from a financial standpoint? What does it look like from a scope standpoint and a functional standpoint? And I get it. We've made the scopes sufficiently broad. So I think there's this, interplay between what the scope says and what the intended functionality is, right? If you're dropping off things like you're going to exclude pedestrian, amenities from it, that functionally is different. If the ballot language said, right, we're improving the roadway, improving the roadway, including bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and you drop off one of those amenities, it's sort of like we know it when we see it, but putting it in words, right, is where I think we fall short sometimes. And so that to me is where we have to focus some attention, adding, some structure to what constitutes a major change from a financial standpoint, a scope standpoint, a functional or amenity standpoint. Beth?
Sure. You kind of said a lot of what I wanted to say, that I think it's not just a definition, on the monetary side, but or what a major change is, but what is a scope change? Because to Paul's example, about, going from an at-grade crossing to, maybe, taking the water, under the road, that the 30% plan a lot of times is the first time our public actually sees kind of on paper what this project looks like. And I think that we're all hamstringing ourselves if we make the language so restrictive that we can't address, public comment and concern, because they're reading the language and they have kind of a picture in their head of what this is going to look like. But, as we know, even some of the best engineers have a hard time figuring out what something on a plan looks like in real life, let alone just members of the general public. So I want to be able to give ourselves a little bit of latitude so that when the public comes back and says, we're doing a whole brand new road and you're leaving this as an at-grade crossing, and when they finally see that 30% plan, that we have the latitude to be able to go back and say, okay, you know what, we're going to put the water under the road. We're going to make this revision. And that, is that a scope change? Like what is that? So I don't want us to all get caught up later, arguing amongst ourselves, that what's the scope change and what isn't, especially things that happen after 30%. Thanks.
Yeah, so those comments, right, public comments or otherwise on the 30% design would be incorporated in the next milestone, which is at the 60% level. Correct?
Typically, yes.
Okay. Staff has a hand up.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Dan.
Sorry, we just left our hand up.
Oh,
We didn't
okay.
have an additional comment, sorry.
So I think, from the conversation here, staff may have enough to go ahead and further elaborate. And I think, it's what are considered major changes. And I think, to the point where if I go backwards, right, I was talking about, scope or functionality, scope, financial. So functionality may be, right, the scope may be sufficiently broad that you can't tell on its surface whether that's a change or not. And to Beth's point, we're going to be preparing a design that we believe meets the scope of the ballot language, and then we're going to go to the public with that, and the public's going to provide input. And then based on that input, we may make adjustments to it. And so it might be more reasonable that then that next iteration of the plan set that incorporates public comments from the 30% plan would be the point in which we say things, are set. And then, if there's a financial implication, right, a cost increase to changes, or, that statutory language, or then some additional diminishment of functionality beyond that, that might be what the trigger for subsequent major changes are. But I think we need staff to sort of take what was discussed here and talk it over and come back to us with some additional recommendation on it. Paul?
And I'm good. I think the definitions is the perfect place for that.
Okay. All right, good. I'm going to suggest we're just beyond 9:30. Suggest we take a break. We come back at 9:40, and then we'll continue. Is that good for everyone? All right,
Great, thank you.
let's go ahead and take a break. Thanks. Yeah, and the staff ready to resume?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we are back and ready to roll.
Okay. All righty.
All right, let's proceed to the next C. This is comment number 63, originally from Oro Valley, related to funding and project delays. For the text that states that the project delays will occur in the order of scheduling priorities of the RTA board, comment is this will cause compression. So suggested wording for this item is if there are no funds available, the RTA board will be responsible for establishing project and program delivery priorities, timeframes, and funding allocations. Optionally, this is just something that we've been discussing, and we even have some additional thoughts here to consider, but we could list out the potential funding options if it's helpful. If not, since new innovations and opportunities might come up over 20 years, we could scratch this language. But just as an example, some of those alternative funding options could be potential additional revenue, which is that contingency line under each of the elements, cost savings from value engineering, cost savings from overestimating the original project budget, local funding, federal state formula funding, federal state grants, jurisdictional loans, debt service such as bonding, loan from another element, budget, or accepting a substantial change, which would require going back out to the voters. There could be others. Again, this is an idea just to put that all out there transparently, but if it's not of added value, we could scratch that.
Dan, can we just see the section that pops that this comment refers to, please?
Certainly, that was page 1112D. And it reads, starting from the header, the RTA board shall maximize programming of funds for projects in the roadway elements as follows, listing out 3, and then D mentions if there is a deficit of program funds to the RTA projects, either local or regional funds may be added to make up any deficiency. If there are no funds available, project delays will occur in the order of the scheduling priorities as determined by the original ballot date. So in other words, this says that if there's a deficit, there's either you have to fund it from local funds or RTA funds, or there will be delays. We thought that this could be revised with more of delivery focus in mind.
And is there any clarity on what in the order of scheduling priorities refers to? I understand this is the existing language. There are no funds available. Project delays will occur in the order of the scheduling priorities. Is that phases? Is that referring to phases?
I would presume that's referring to the voter-approved, board and voter-approved RTA plan when appropriate, or through the TIP process. But Jim has a thought on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe it does refer to the phasing. I don't believe that there was any greater level of prioritization put into the 2006 plan than that.
All right, thank you. Paul?
Yeah, so the purpose of this comment is twofold. One is to prevent another pillaging of PAG funding again. Using a stopgap that we probably shouldn't be, because there's a reason for that PAG funding. The other one is what's our cash flow analysis. I don't have anything in particular that I disagree with on this with regard to either a local or regional funds can make up that deficiency. But it's just making sure that we're scheduling and we're bonding as little as possible so that we don't end up with a lot of debt service, just in case we run into another Great Recession. I want some type of a game plan that does not require the sequestering of PAG funding for the rest of our natural lifespan.
Dan, can we go back? Yeah, I'd go back to the staff recommendation. So, Paul, do you have thoughts on either of these two options? One just says the RTA board will be responsible for establishing project and program delivery priorities, timeframes, and funding allocations.
So I'll say something that's probably not politically expedient, and that is, yes, that concerns me. That's what happened last time.
Okay. So that is, okay, I see someone just inserted the current wording. So you don't feel that D, the initial offering, fully addresses the concern. And so there's optional additional language, right, that goes into listing what alternate funding options may be available. And is it a combination of the first suggested language and the second, or do you have other recommendations on how to maybe get to the concern that you have?
Yeah, this was this was a hand grenade comment. I dropped the grenade and I ran away from it. I don't have the answer. I just know what my concern is. My concern is the rating of PAG. So if we can
Understood, and we heard that a lot through the various committee levels all the way up to the RTA board and those board members, and so I'm curious if others have thoughts or maybe more importantly a recommendation on how to frame this aspect of it. Is there an alternate approach to just saying it'll be the RTA board that establishes the responsibilities? And look, I mean, I think that there is some value to that. I think, though, part of the challenges that we've faced in the last periods of RTA has been that our subcommittees have been told that they were not authorized to have discussion or to make recommendations on how to address some of the funding shortfalls, that authority was reserved to the board. So by just including language that says it's the board's responsibility, I don't know that we're helping ourselves or helping the board, right? To the extent that it should include some open vetting of what the situation is, what the set of options are, and a series of recommendations through a variety of committees up to the RTA board for action. And maybe, Mike has talked about formalizing an escalation path or process. And so, this may be directly related to that. And I'm open to input and ideas. And Mike, if you've got any thoughts on this, certainly that may help the group along.
Thanks, Carmine. So I think you all have heard the discussions, and it really is about it's not only escalating, but it's resolving the issues quickly. That's really the bottom line. And so how we identify that, and it doesn't have to be a straight line. I mean, it can be a little bit circuitous to give folks an opportunity to resolve the issue at a lower level. But ultimately, we can't allow things to fester. And so, quite frankly, pretty open to how that can occur, how that can work. But the spirit and intent of that is not letting it fester, not letting it sit. I mean, Carmine, you're aware of some decisions and disagreements that were there, and Sam, you are too, for an extended period of time. And what I'm suggesting is that in order for us to keep moving the projects forward and the program forward, we've got to have a mechanism by which, any one of the parties can say, hey, we got to escalate this immediately and get this resolved. And we shouldn't allow it to fester. So that's really the spirit and intent. I mean, I've got a lot of ideas and thoughts, and we've talked about them internally, can help with that if you've got a specific question, but I just wanted to kind of give you that high level thought.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think, some progression, right? We would expect the initial attempts to resolve to be between jurisdictional staff and RTA staff. If that then isn't resolved, the issues aren't resolved, then where does it go from there? Does it go to TMC, or does it go to TPC then TMC for review and recommendations? Maybe what it says here, right? Ultimately, the RTA board is responsible. How do we take it through a progression of evaluation and consideration of options to make a recommendation, right? It should be that there's input at the appropriate levels through committees in order to get something in front of the board for them to make a decision on. Paul?
And perhaps maybe, just to address my concern directly, it might be as simple as just making a prohibition for those federal, state, and local funding sources that all go to PAG, that they're not on the table, but everything else is. Because you just rattled through a whole bunch of possibilities here. And the concern, at least the concern I was expressing was again to throw PAG in the mix. If we have a prohibition of throwing PAG in the mix, and that's a rail that's established, anything else can work.
So, what if we go back to one of the first topics we discussed, right? And we were, looking at an order of applying of funds. What if, we were to reverse that order, right, and say, right, that where, there becomes funding deficiencies, you'll go through in reversal, right? It was RTA funds, local funds, then, something to that. I think, Paul, a prohibition at this stage, not knowing what we may encounter, might be too heavy of an approach to get. I understand the concern, and I agree that we need to fashion something. Starting with a prohibition seems to really limit our flexibility going forward. But I'm open, to the conversation.
Well, I think the conversation back in 2014 and even before that, even starting off in, what was it, 2008 or so, as we recognize the train wreck coming down the tracks here, I do believe at that point that there were three options brought forward. One was have PAG supplement, one was have an extension of the RTA, and I think the other one was maybe we need to eliminate some projects. Two of those three possibilities were nixed immediately. Thou shalt not discuss those anymore. I think those are very viable options. And if we have a recognition that those are indeed viable options, I'm comfortable with a prohibition. I just think we just change up the prohibitions that we had from the last time we went through this.
Yeah, let me go to staff, see what feedback they have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. This is Dan. So with this, we could potentially revise that optional language below to follow a process, or maybe like an order of things that could be reviewed. So as we go through any escalation process, we can confirm, did we try value engineering? Were there opportunities to, get the cost savings there? No? Okay, then we move on to the next one and so forth. To Paul's point, we do have our regional federal formula funds on the list here as options, because they are options, but perhaps that could be one of the lower options to consider first. And with that, if we were to go that route, of course, we would have to consider any implications to meeting our state and federal requirements. as part of that process. But the intent here was to just kind of put an a la carte menu of all options to consider. And if that were to be considered as part of this process, before we just say there's an overage, okay, we're going to give you more money at the board level to make sure that we're considering our options. So just some thoughts there. I see Mike also has his hand up.
I appreciate that, Dan. Mike?
Thanks, Carmine. So, Paul, I understand the concern. What I would suggest that you all think about, though, is ultimately it's a policy decision, and the policy decision will be based on all of the options available to them at the time. And even in 13, 14, 15, we really didn't know what the outcome was going to be. We had a roadmap. We thought we did, but we didn't know a lot of what we know now. It's always easier to look back. What I would suggest is that we list all of them, but the process is more important than what is listed there, meaning how we vet it. And what I was trying to explain earlier is it doesn't have to be a straight line. It can have, varied conversations to really explore all of the options in great detail. Because it could be that even some of the things that we know for certain today, like those regional monies, may not be available in the future for whatever other reason. And so I would just suggest to you that the process of how we escalate the conversation is probably more important than the options that we try to list out today, because there might be other options that are available in the future that we don't even know about today. So I just throw that out to you. I understand the reservation, if you will, of listing potentially the regional funds, but I wouldn't get too hung up on that right this second, because I would have more confidence or more conversation around the process is my suggestion. Also, Carmine, I've got to bug off. I've got a meeting in town, so I'll see you all later. Okay, good job.
Yeah, appreciate the time
you
spent with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I mean, I tend to agree with what Mike just said. Ensuring that there is a fulsome discussion of both the circumstances and then the options. And I feel that some focus in defining that clearly it is necessary. I wasn't around in 2014 well, I was around, but I wasn't part of this process in 2014 when that decision was made by the RTA board to allocate regional funds. And I don't know what involvement the committees had in vetting options and providing recommendations. I know that as time progressed from 2014 to more current, that there wasn't as much engaging with the committees. And I think that's an important component of what we put in place going forward. So, I think we need to see some additional narrative from staff that outlines the process and then addresses, the concern that out of hand, right, is what Paul indicated, right? Almost instantaneously, other potentially viable options were discounted. And I don't know if those made their way to the board for their consideration, or if they were eliminated even prior to that. And so I think we've got to do ourselves a favor by ensuring that we have the ability to look at any and all options thoroughly and through a series of forums before arriving at a decision.
Fair enough.
All right. So I think staff, again, you've got some input that tells you where we still need maybe some enhancement of where we land on this one.
Chair, we'll definitely incorporate that escalation process as part of this and come back with some revised language. Okay, the next comment was actually similar. nearly identical as on the same item, just coming from the city of Tucson. So with what we come back for that last item should also address this comment as well. If we could then move forward.
Okay.
Okay, and we are down to comment number 77, coming from Oro Valley. Project deferral, no substantial change. So the comment is, refers to projects and categorical elements not making substantial progress, states this should be applicable to all projects, but not remove the project from the program, just defund it in the tip and reallocate the funds to another project that can start or advance. Comment also states that substantial is subject to opinion. We could go back to the POPs real quick if that's helpful.
The purpose of that comment really revolved around having projects sit in the tip and encumber funding that could be used elsewhere. You know, should we have a limit to how long a project stays stagnant in the tip? And I understand projects stay stagnant for various reasons. You know, you're in your 30% design, you've got a lot of public input, and it's taken forever to get through that public input. But at what point does that encumbrance create a log jam for others that are ready to go? That's the purpose of that comment.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And if I could, our initial suggestion was that we would delete this provision because we felt that it was handled through other areas that we've previously discussed. If we do keep it, agree with the Vice Chair that we would probably want to address this holistically as opposed to just those two elements. But our suggestion is that we do feel it is handled through other policy elements, and that it would be okay to delete.
What's the preference of the members on those two approaches, delete or expand it to make sure it covers all elements?
I myself would like a little specificity, but I'm willing to go with wherever the group goes.
Bill?
I was just going to say delete, and then Paul said specificity. I could go either way, but I do think it is covered elsewhere.
I think, you know, maybe Dan, team seeing where it's covered elsewhere, right? I mean, we trust, right? Can we also verify that where it's covered actually addresses the input? And so I can go either way with it. If we're confident that it is covered elsewhere, then it's likely duplicative and we can delete it. If it's not sufficiently covered elsewhere, then maybe we need to bolster those other sections and delete it, or then we decide to keep it. So it'd be helpful to me to see where else this is covered before we make a decision on it.
Sure. If you like, we can do both. We can identify where it's covered and then also revise the current language as would be appropriate, and then just bring it back and you could let us know if it should be revised or deleted.
Gotcha.
Cover both grounds there.
Okay.
Okay, next comment is comment number 86 from Tucson related to right-of-way reimbursements. Comment is this might be simplified if RTA purchases the right-of-way as contemplated in note 27 above. Our comment is recommend revising 6.1b to reflect March 11th, 2026 and leaving the remaining language intact. And further recommend that any potential RTA right-of-way staff updating the manual per revised procedures. That's something that we're still evaluating, of course, but based on past input from our executive director and his past memo, it's something that we're exploring, but it might be helpful to first figure out what that organizational structure would be and having some expertise in updating that manual to help to this effect. We can go back to the actual POPs if that's helpful. Okay, and it says, was this the one? 3? Let's see. Okay. The IGA and/or project charter will identify the appropriate priorities for reimbursement for advanced right-of-way acquisition and/or work if more than one agency is requesting such reimbursement for that project.
So Dan, did I hear that staff is still discussing what an approach might be? I mean, I understand changing the date or placing a date in there, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, is there any further consideration that staff is giving to this and will bring something back, or says recommend any potential RTA right-of-way staff updating the manual per revised procedure? So we're updating the manual.
Yeah, I believe part of the POPs above that also referenced the manual, if I'm not mistaken. You mind going back one more time, Adam? Right. So in 6.1c, it referenced that manual. So that outlines the procedures for advanced right-of-way acquisition. So this is a reference to that. So the thought was we could certainly change the date in B, which is straightforward. But otherwise, we feel that the language in here is still applies and really references that manual, which we could then update.
And when would the manual updates occur?
That is a good question. I think that would be the second step. First is we would have to identify organizationally if we indeed wanted to take on some additional right-of-way staff, how that would look, or if that would be a consultant contract. Once we confirm what that looks like moving forward, then we could bring that person on to help us with that effort.
So Sam, having comment, or the city having commented on this, do you have a preference on, well, one is a simple change, right? The date change makes sense, right? And then it sounds like the rest of the response to your question on, simplifying RTA purchases would be addressed in the manual.
Yeah, I think that addresses the question there. Yeah, that would work.
Thank you, Sam and Mr. Chair.
And that manual update might include, as we were talking about before, RTA bringing on staff or engaging consultant resources to assist with the right-of-way processes.
Yes, that is the intent.
All right. And then just for, future reference, if you can come back and let us know where that timing, where that manual update fits in amongst all the other things we're doing. I mean, does that get taken care of right after we clear what's necessary to get to the RTA board from our current efforts, or does it get rolled in and we have to do that as part of what we'll be presenting to the board?
Yeah, I imagine we have a little time there, and one of the big factors of that is what happens in March. So, certainly that plays a huge factor in what our future organizational structure will look like and how much funding we have for those types of changes. So I don't see that this would be happening overnight, but I also think we have quite a bit of time before this will be a huge issue. But either way, rather than trying to anticipate the changes and put those details in both this and that manual, if the manual is the home for those that specificity, and we're referencing it here, then our recommendation is to leave that reference and update the manual when appropriate.
Okay. So I think you have consensus and revise the date and that we update the manual at the appropriate time, which may be after the election.
Correct. Okay, moving to the next comment, number 87 from Oro Valley related to surplus funds. Regarding release of surplus funds on a completed project, comment states need a time frame. This could happen during the TIP rollover period. We really could use some feedback from this group regarding the timing of doing that, and can also defer to staff to weigh in. But we would really appreciate some input. And then we also recommend that making sure that we reference the jurisdictional shares as part of this. Or reference it as identified elsewhere within the POPs, either way. And going to the POPs, the original statement is any surplus funds remaining on categorical element projects after the scope of work identified in the IGA is complete and all eligible costs have been reimbursed shall be released for reprogramming on other projects within the same sub-element of the RTA plan.
Again, this goes to our previous comment from Oro Valley with regard to making sure that we free up funding as fast as we can. And maybe it's as simple as that. There might not be a good definition in there, or I leave it to this group to, if there's a better way to define that.
I think we could certainly put some language in there to that effect to encouraging that process occurs in a timely manner. If that's the best way to handle that.
Mm-hmm. I guess I would ask the question: are we going to have project audits? I remember at one point we started to have project audits, but they kind of went away. Are we going to have those project audits at the conclusion of a project just to make sure that all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed as far as the promises, and that's truly closed out? And then at that point, I would see no reason why those funds could not be released.
Good question. I'm going to have to defer back to staff. I know we have program audits on a regular basis, but what has been our process as part of the project closeout and reimbursement? Has there been any audits at project level in the past?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any formal audits that we've gone through. I know that certainly we've gone through closeout processes, and at times we did work with the jurisdiction to identify what funds could be released, and then we did supplemental calls for projects. We did that in the past.
Catherine?
Yeah, I was just gonna, echo and add to, I think having a developed closeout process that is followed for all projects, whether they're named corridor projects or they're in the elements, would be really helpful. And that's where this could be captured. I think for ease of programming and having real chunks of money, if you will, to work with, it makes sense to only release it on an annual basis while you're developing the TIP. Otherwise, they're going to come in piecemeal through the year, which is not very useful in terms of surplus funding. But I know there's a lot of areas in here where a time-bound closeout process would be helpful, especially so that when those every 5-year audits of the overall come up, basically PAG RTA has that data already instead of, sometimes we're chasing back years and years trying to collect the data.
Very good. Thanks, Catherine. Dan, I think with that, that captures the essence, right? I heard time bound and a formalized, closeout process, right? And one that's, complete or robust as you've captured there.
Thank you all. Just want to defer back to staff. Jamie, Rick, any concerns with considering annual tip process, or James, and factoring in a closeout process with that? What does that look like from your perspective as far as the timing of that and having those funds available to release?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Just a preliminary thought is that early in the tip development process, we could have meetings with jurisdictions to go through the list of projects and discuss any projects that are eligible for closeout and walk through that process and identify funds that would be available a month or two later during the development of the project list. So that's my initial thought. I think we can incorporate it. Thank you.
Okay. I do know from past internal discussions, we're looking at tracking both the finances and project delivery, and closeout, I imagine, would be an important near final, if not final step on that tracking process. So yeah, I think those comments are well received, and we'll come back with some revisions accordingly.
Yeah, and Dan, I appreciate Jamie's input on the timing or the sequence of that conversation leading into the tip. I think the tip rollover, I think also as important as where it's slotted is that we standardize, right, the gathering of information around closeout. And so what does that look like? So it's the sequencing and the form of what that gathering of input looks like.
I guess one other component I'm thinking out loud as part of this process is, in addition to the closeout process occurring, we may also need to factor in invoicing. The funding should be available, but I guess not having been in the weeds on this before, are there any concerns with releasing funds before final invoicing is done? Would that happen after closeout or before, based on current processes? Like, can we close out the project with invoices pending?
Not if you're going to make revenue available.
Okay.
The idea is to make it available, then you have to have everything done.
Yeah.
So invoices received and paid and all accounted for.
So that would be a factor, and not necessarily saying that all that has to happen in a very quick order, but based on what is available at the time, that's what would be factored into this annual process, I imagine. So something to consider if there are a lot of large outstanding invoices out there, and that those aren't factored into the rollover and reviewing what funds are available, that may play a factor. So just something to consider.
Paul?
Yeah, this all goes back to, just kind of cash flow of the program. And I would not suggest releasing individual project funds until everything's said and done and closed out, because that could leave an individual jurisdiction holding the ball that they did not expect in case something pops up. So I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just suggesting that we have to get the project closed out, and then if that surplus exists, to timely get that surplus recognized. And there might be the ability to move projects up because of that, depending on the size of the project and the size of that savings.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chair. Well, again, we'll come back and follow up with this. I think it'd be helpful for me, new to the process, to get a better understanding with staff of the flow and that process. But Mr. Chair, your comments to standardizing the sequence of events, I think would be helpful. So we'll come back and follow up on that.
Very good.
Okay. moving down, the next one is comment number 89, also from the city of Tucson, related to definitions. This might be unique. This might be unique by jurisdiction and project context, which should be specifically accounted for. May be helpful if we roll over to the POPs real quick. This is for $2,006. I'm skipping one. I'm sorry, that was the next one. Enhancements, my apologies. So the current definition is, in addition to a project that exceeds generally accepted engineering or design standards for a specific project or facility, the IGA or project charter will specify project enhancements. So based on recommendation to delete prior reference, in the project descriptions, we had deleted enhancement and spelled that out. We could potentially delete this definition. And with that, any overages would follow the eligible items process that we had outlined in previous comments. Is the proposal here.
Any thoughts?
I see Patrick still on. He's about to hop off. Patrick, was this your comment? And are you good with this response?
Yeah, I think that was, and it was just back in reference to making sure that we were capturing those eligible costs and not treating things that we would assume as standard parts of our project delivery as enhancements. So I think, based on the earlier discussions we've been having, I think that's all captured.
Cool. Thanks, Patrick. That works for us.
Thank you all. We can move on to the next one then. This is comment number 99, I believe. Yes, this originally came from Mr. Lewick. Page 7, item 4, project websites. Add another item that reads, establish project websites and maintain such websites to accurately reflect project status. From our perspective, it's the local jurisdictions that would be updating the websites. We could certainly reference local jurisdictional websites from our website if that is a preference, but I don't think that we need to do much change here. Any thoughts or comments on this?
Dan, just one thought. It says it's the responsibility of the jurisdictions. Is that included in the IGA? So is that responsibility specifically identified or included in the IGA?
I don't know, but I don't know that it's needed for each and every project. This is probably at the local jurisdictions purview for maybe the larger, more complex projects, perhaps. Some of those might have its own project website or a tab on the jurisdictional website, if that's the way that the jurisdictions do things. But ultimately, I don't think that the RTA that would be developing websites for individual projects, that would be the jurisdictions that would do that. As
not having Kurt here, right? I can't query him on what his intent was. It seems as though he felt like more was necessary to ensure that project websites were established and updated, and so I don't know from the jurisdictional standpoint what thoughts there are here. I think, where is it reflected that it's, because I heard you say, Dan, it may not be required for every project, and then does every jurisdiction decide which projects have a website and which don't, and then therefore are we inconsistent or piecemealing the ability for the public to track what's happening on projects? So we can go to Fausto.
Yeah, I guess I'd also question what's our definition of website? the town of Marana utilizes a portal that the public can interface with, and we capture all of our project on that portal, whether it be transportation, vertical parks, you name it. Does that suffice? Is that okay? Because you can click on and, excuse me, get information for each project. It's not a specific website per project, it's a combination.
Yeah, good point, Fausto. And I've seen your portal, and I think that that is a easy way for people to access information and track projects in Marana. Staff has a comment or thought.
Yeah, Carmine and all, I think, I mean, to an earlier question you asked, I don't believe we get as granular as requiring that websites are a part of our IGA. I just don't think we've dialed down to that level of detail in the ones I recall putting together recently. But second of all, I think reading into Kurt, I think his concern came from frustration on Silverbell, and we occasionally run into projects where there is a lull while things are pending, and we ran into that. And unfortunately, it was one of those, okay, when's construction forthcoming? We couldn't give specificity because that was an unknown for various reasons. So I think if there's from what we've watched, there is a general commitment from the jurisdictions to keep the information up to date, accurate, and we'll go periodic ones based on the major milestones for those applicable projects. I think we've seen that. I think this one may be a one-off that he was just a lot more intimately familiar with. So I'll offer that for consideration, that I don't know how prevalent this has been.
I think from a transparency standpoint and a communication standpoint, having some guidelines in place in terms of what has a web present and what does not make sense. Also, though, at the same time, I understand that the upkeep of those may put additional demands on limited resources. And really, to me, it's a question of, do we mandate some minimal standard for having information on the web, and for what types of projects it's there, or do we leave it as is, which is it's up to the jurisdiction in order to go ahead and decide those things?
Mr. Chair, this is Dan. I guess from my earlier introduction, that was a soft way of saying that we don't really necessarily feel we need to address this in the POPs with an additional item. We could leave it up to the jurisdictions to make that call on a project by project basis. So I think unless someone really feels that we need to add this, I guess we could recommend that it's fine as is.
Okay. Paul?
What if a template was created and that kind of outlined the minimal information that, RTA would like to see, or, this group would like to see? Yeah, so there's a little bit of uniformity across jurisdictions on this.
And it may be right. Every jurisdiction has their own branding and layout. It may be that, just minimally indicating that, jurisdictions it's recommended that jurisdictions provide, these types of information. I don't know. I don't know that we've heard from the public that, I don't know that we've heard from the public that they're not able to find information other than in certain specific circumstances. I wonder if we could come back to this after, a March election and decide if there's something more that can be done in this area. I mean, and maybe it's appropriate for, a committee to discuss it, right? Maybe we ask the TPC to, weigh in a little bit more on this and come back with some ideas. It doesn't seem like we have to resolve this right now, but at some point, and just leaning towards more transparency and public communication is better. I feel like we should do something with it, but I don't know that we've got to rack our brains trying to figure it out right now. Catherine?
Yeah, I agree, Carmine. We don't have to rack our brains. I think this, one of the things we've heard is the public doesn't know what RTA is, so much of going into the election is education.
Yeah.
And maybe so to me, this is more of a comms issue than an actual project description communication issue. It's how do we want to brand so the public is giving credit to the RTA and it becomes part of the narrative. And I think providing specific project information on their website or links to the others so that there's a better, stronger connection is helpful. And it may be less about it's a 3-lane roadway, it's a whatever, but it's about knowing what RTA is.
Yeah. I mean, that becomes important for RTA next, right?
RTA subsequent.
Yeah.
RTA, not ours to plan.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think not losing track of this and coming back to it and maybe getting the communications, teams, representatives from the various jurisdictions to come together. Maybe the RTA comms team can convene that and say, okay, what is it that we can be doing really to tout the benefits and the successes of the RTA Next program.
Sounds good. I think we can make that plug. I see Sheila's on the call. So definitely we could coordinate that. And if we need to make any changes, we can.
Okay.
Okay, looks like we are down to our final yellow. This is comment number 126 from the county. General comment. Only project 2006.01 includes as a funding source residual funding from the 2006 RTA plan. What is that amount? Is it already reflected in the TIP? Our understanding was that the remaining 2006 RTA funds were being applied to the remaining RTA 1 projects that weren't listed in the RTA Next plan. If we can scroll over, may just need a little bit of clarification on this as far as is this related to the project descriptions? As a comment in the board approved RTA Next plan, the description for all RTA 1 projects being carried forward is shown below to address that comment. And the amount of the RTA Next funding applied to that particular project is 7.2 million per the plan. So just, we think it's addressed, but we want to make sure that we're understanding the comment.
Sure. I made that comment. It was on the individual project description sheets. Gotcha. In the portion where it says project funding. And of course that says the 7.2 million of RTA project funding. It says 6.9 of regional funding. And then it says residual funding from 2006 RTA plan. And the difference is none of the other carryover projects have that line residual funding. So I didn't know what is the difference between this Tangerine carryover project and the others?
Good comment. I think we can go back to the project descriptions and look at those 2006 projects and make sure that we're providing consistent language to that line to the effect of the funding that's being carried over, if that would address the comment.
Yeah, I think that would address it.
Will do. And with that, as we're typing in our notes here, that does conclude all of the yellow needs discussion items, which is great. 10:35. We still do have a significant amount of Bs, which are the ones that staff have already addressed based on past comments and also ones that have not been discussed, but we have some preliminary language for review. So Mr. Chair, if you'd like, we can go back to those and start going through those.
Let me just check with the team. We had a break an hour ago. Any need for a break, or do we just go forward? Okay. Looks like we can go forward, Dan. So, yep.
Right. We will go ahead and go back up top and start with the Bs. And with these, at this point, we're really hoping to hone in on any fatal flaws with the descriptions, so we could try to get through all these. And if we do not get through all these today, we could send this out and request a follow-up to confirm. But we'll go through as much as we can here. So starting with the first one, would you mind just scrolling over? Sorry for the number. This was comment number 1 from the towns, originally from the TMC. Comment was project delivery timing. All projects must be initiated by the end of the period 3 and completed by the end of period 4 for purposes of this requirement. Initiated means the design is complete and the project has gone out to bid. Staff recommendation to remain consistent with the board approved RTA Next plan. Construction will start in the period listed and follow programming requirements in section 3.2, which is the programming, the RTA plan. RTA staff will partner with jurisdictions to expedite delivery with an aspirational goal of delivering the program by the end of period 4. With that last remark, there are projects that are going to be programmed out for the entire 5 years of period 4. So some of those projects near the end, may not realistically be completed within that period. But again, from an aspirational goal, we could look at all opportunities to try to achieve that.
Any comments? I know this was combined input from the towns. You comfortable with that? As I see Paul nodding. See some thumbs
we're
up.
comfortable. Yep.
Okay. Maybe I'll go. Does anybody oppose it? So it sounds like we're good on that one.
It's about the best you can do.
Okay.
Thank you all. Okay, the next comment, number 2, this was also from the TMC originally. Quarter project cost share. All quarter projects shall require a 10% cost share contribution from the sponsoring agency. Staff recommendation is considering not all jurisdictions would have access to cost share funding, and due to revised revenue targets of the approved RTA plan, recommend maintaining current practice of zero cost share. Local contributions are incorporated into the RTA Next plans in the committed non-RTA dollars column. We'll collaborate on other options to improve delivery.
Okay. Anybody have any comments on that?
Okay, we can move on if there are no comments. Next comment. Oh. Thank you, Adam. Next comment, again, original TMC comment from the towns. This is related to project policy and delivery. Shoulder widths, agencies are limited to a maximum 8-foot paved road shoulder. Should an agency wish to expand this, the additional cost will be the responsibility of the agency. We would just suggest that the response to comment number 3 would be acceptable based on past discussion. And again, we had discussed this earlier, but that's to policy item number 23 in section 1.0 as shown in the box there.
I would offer that, speaking from one of the towns, this and the previous comment, not really where we wanted to go, but it's where the group went, so I can accept that.
I was going to say something similar, that if that's the way the project was originally costed out, and we have provisions now that if something is changing from the way it was originally anticipated, that we do have those safeguards in place. So I guess I'm okay.
Yeah, I concur.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And I would agree. I think we spent time, ensuring that appropriate safeguards were there. And so that seems to be the consensus approach.
Great, thank you all. Okay, we could move on to comment number 5, again, originally from the TMC related to landscaping and art. And if you could scroll over a little bit, thanks. So in our past discussion, we had talked about a number of things. Some of that was utilizing a standards percentage, recommend using up to a maximum rather than at least. Any variation from that is responsibility of the agency, or they may engage the cost increase process for soliciting additional funds. So with all of everything that was considered before, the suggested wording for 17I and 17O and the POPs is any and all projects utilizing RTA funding shall adhere to the following thresholds for landscape and public art. Landscaping, up to a maximum of 4% goal of the bid items at final design as certified. And for public art, the same, but a maximum of up to 1% goal. In the event these thresholds are exceeded, the lead jurisdiction shall obtain approval from the TMC to deviate from these thresholds. We feel that that captures past discussion, but wanted to circle back and make sure that we address that appropriately.
Again, same comment. I mean, it was discussed by the group, and we have some clarity here. Again, I think the three of us were of consensus to not have this as part of the RTA, but we understand that we're working with a group here, and the group came up with that. So we appreciate the ability that there is the definition, that's constant with what we have.
I'll agree with Paul.
Sam?
Yeah, I just have a question that, that second bullet says public art up to a maximum amount of 1% goal of the construction bid items at final design as certified. A lot of times for these public art projects, we're going through the process of selecting an artist and figuring out what the art's going to look like much earlier in the process. I'm just curious about timing, and do we preserve some amounts, I guess, or target amounts, but then it's not finalized, so final design? I just was curious if any of that was contemplated.
We did discuss that a little, Sam, because the art and landscaping are typically a final design element, typically starting in the 90% plus time frame when that really gets into the weeds there. So, we can go several different routes with this. As proposed, we would go through the TMC for deviations. And we also, provided the flexibility of goal there. So if something were to come up earlier, if that was recognized earlier in the process, that those components likely would be higher, we could certainly discuss it earlier in the process and perhaps come up with some language for that specific project to allow something more than those goals earlier on.
And I think just, what I'm trying to get at here is I'm not suggesting that we're trying to figure out what to do if there's more. I just want to be able to have a sense of like the scale of the 1%. Like, I think we'll know earlier in the design process, if it's $1 million or $100,000. And then using that kind of placeholder amount through the design process as, the potential amount for public art, with the intent of at the end of the final design, then we really nail down that cost. I think there's got to be like a way that we're giving the artists an idea of how much available funds there are to work with, and giving the project managers an idea as well. That's my only thought here. But I like the idea of at final design is when you kind of nail down that amount. That's all. Thanks.
Beth?
So I would argue that we have, the cost estimates, and that's what the RTA funding is based on. So your initial, guesstimate for your funding should be based on that ballot amount for the final construction piece, subtracting out, your design costs and things like that, which we have available. We have that information for most of the projects. And then we do have a policy in, or a procedure in place where if you go over on something that, and candidly, I would probably also argue that if your project found significant cost savings, but you had planned an art project based on the original amount and now had cost savings, so now you were over on art, that, going through that procedure would be almost a formality that I don't know that anybody would have heartburn that, oh, you saved money elsewhere, so we're going to ding you on your art or on your landscaping or something else. So I think that we have procedures set up elsewhere that would kind of address that issue.
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas where, we've put a framework in place. We've allowed for a process to deal with changes or exceedances that come up. I think that as we go through it and we get experience with it, we, will find opportunities to maybe enhance or better how we're approaching it. I think, Sam, I tend to agree that we've got, a rough estimate of starting point that then ends up being refined, and it's based on final design, right? The 1% is based on construction bids at final design. I think you have to make some assumptions along the way, and I think that those can be successful, right? That approach can be successful. So it may be that we've gotten sort of as close as we're going to get in incorporating and addressing all of the viewpoints on this. And so unless, somebody says there's a real deal breaker in here, I think we're, where we need to be. Sam, are you okay with that?
Yeah, Carmine, I'm good with that. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and all for the discussion there. Okay, we can move on. All right, we are on comment number 12. This was originally part of the TMC debt service for Mr. Lewick. Comment, the board policy should be to strive for PAYGO implementation. If bonds are necessary, the cost of financing should be integrated into the project cost versus tapping a designated debt service account. There are currently few, if any, shovel-ready capital-intensive projects. So before we get into the comments, just as a reminder, we did allot $5 million for debt service as part of the approved plan. So with that, the suggested wording is, in order to maximize the use of pay-as-you-go approach, PAYGO, any and all RTA projects, programs, and operational activities shall be identified, programmed, and delivery timeframes identified that avoid use of debt service financing to the maximum degree possible. Potential use of debt service financing will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis.
Any objection to that? Okay.
Okay, we'll continue on. Comment number 17 from Oro Valley related to funding. Suggests deleting consistent with the minimum amount of funding with the comment stating categorical projects don't have a specified minimum amount. Regarding words and or available, commenter states have an issue with this open statement, needs to have rails on it. And it may be helpful to go to the POPs first before getting into our recommendation. This is page 2, item 4. Yeah, there we go. It is the policy of the RTA board to provide the funding for RTA projects consistent with the minimum amount of funding as designated in the voter-approved RTA plan, adjusted for inflation. Now, if we can go back to our recommendation, we're recommending to revise is the policy of the RTA board to provide the funding for RTA projects consistent with the minimum amount of funding as designated in the voter-approved RTA plan, adjusted for inflation. Programmatic funding will not exceed identified jurisdictional thresholds unless agreed upon between impacted jurisdictions and approved by the board. You can see also the process outlined, comment number 80. So that was our attempt to address the guardrails to that comment, that second sentence.
I don't have any objection to it.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Sam?
Yeah. Well, two things. Have we talked about how it's going to be adjusted for inflation, or is that contemplated anywhere else in these documents?
On our October 15th meeting, we're going to do a deep dive into finance, and we'll be
Okay.
discussing it in more detail at that time.
Okay, great. And then, Carmine, I just want to let you know I've got to jump to another meeting. I don't know that I'll be back before you all end. James Castaneda is still on for the City of Tucson. If you have anything for us, he can either comment or take notes and bring it back to us.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
Sam.
Bye-bye.
Beth?
I just wanted to, same as Sam, I have to jump off at 11, but Nathan Barrett will be jumping back on, and so he'll be on for the town of Sarita.
Okay, thank you. And Dan, we're okay if we have a jurisdictional representative on in place of the appointed committee member?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for that discussion. Next comment, number 18, also from Oro Valley. Recommend deleting before funding can be made available by the RTA. Commenter stated projects not started within a set time are removed from the tip and no longer encumber funding till ready to go. Comment also stated if the project is in the tip, the funding source is deemed available. And our response is to consider aligning this process for the comment response to number 74. Yeah, let's go to the POPs first. 3.5, right there on the top. Originally, it states, it is a policy of the RTA board to require the RTA projects be incorporated and appropriate funding levels are committed in the PAG's regional transportation improvement program before funding can be made available by the RTA. Go to comment number 74. So this is our very involved comment response and process, as we have discussed previously. So if this does not fully address that comment, we could discuss some options doing so.
So Paul, you had an item that was flagged last time about debt service and allowing flexibility. Is that addressed in what we talked about above on debt service? We put an explicit provision in there about minimizing, avoiding use of debt service to the extent, maximum extent possible.
I think so. I think so. I mean, yeah. I don't want to be a dead horse on this.
I think the input has been important, and certainly made multiple attempts to try and address it in different locations throughout. So appreciate you raising it and staying with it consistently to the point where we're in better shape than we were prior to starting this effort.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Carmine. And I fully feel that this is an iterative process. We've come up with this. Hopefully, this is a living document that as we see things that we need to continually address, we can. And maybe it's on RTA subsequent that we finally get this down to 100%.
I'm going to go Fausto and then Beth.
Hey, so I'm going to try not to beat the horse too, but can we go back to the POPs real quick? I apologize. I'm just on my laptop, so I can't have both.
No worries.
Or this is number 5 on the top there.
We did it in the PAGs. So I guess, yeah, I want to make sure I read that right. What about the fact that we're talking about fast forwarding right-of-way acquisition and things like that? So potentially acquiring property for projects that are in period 4. How does that play into this? And I guess even going back to establishing an IGA for each project up front, logistically, that's going to be, are we establishing IGAs for all projects or the projects that we're identifying that, hey, we want to start making movements up front, but we're talking period 1 or 2, but it's really period 4, that project comes into fruition? I guess, sorry, I don't mean to go backwards a little bit, but that's something that's been kind of rambling around in my mind as we've talked about how we're going to fast forward some of these activities.
That's actually a really good point, Fausto, and I don't know if it's 100% addressed in this policy as stated, but in the comment resolution, we do recommend that near the bottom, in the bottom paragraph related to advancing projects. If we can go back to the response real quick, Adam. So that right before the comment from Paul. So in the event there is an opportunity to start construction on a project in an earlier phase, the lead jurisdiction and RTA staff shall review the proposed request and assess the capacity of the program to support this action. Assessment shall include, but not limited to, work environment along with capacity to deliver, funding needed, amount and source, need for debt service, any risk associated with advancement, any risk associated with not advancing. So that's our attempt there, which we could add that language to that provision, if that's helpful.
Yeah, because that's when I read that. I mean, we're talking construction activity. Obviously, right-of-way acquisition, we're still in an earlier stage than construction. So that's why I want to make sure we're capturing that, as that's been discussed over and over by the board and Mr. Ortega, as far as how we're going to look at doing some of those activities to help streamline the overall program.
Thank you for that. Mr. Chair and others, any concerns with us adding language to that effect, to that provision?
I don't have concern. Beth has her hand up and Paul, so let's follow through those two speakers and then we can maybe capture what we need to amend.
So I don't have a comment on amending this language. I have a comment on something Paul just said previously about this being a living document. That do we need to have some sort of language in the document indicating that it's anticipated that we're going to make changes to this so nobody takes this as gospel, or even set up a kind of, a minimum, time frame that we should be coming back and making sure that, hey, everything's working the way we thought it was supposed to, and making changes if necessary. So that's my question. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Beth, we do have a response somewhere in here to that effect. We'll have to go search for it. But I recall that the discussion and response led to that we would update it as needed. And Jim had also a thought there. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Beth, I believe there's language in there that already talks about doing it. I think it even suggests annually. I believe the last time we looked at it was in 2014, but we did have, we have looked at the POPs at least 3 times since its original adoption.
Okay. Yeah, if we can just flag that for the attention of all of us, that would be helpful. Paul, you had a hand up and then it went down.
Yeah. So I was going to say to address Fausto's concern. We just need to program in the tip. And again, it's all about the cash flow, the overall program cash flow. And I'm hoping that we do have a master cash flow plan that takes, and it's continually updated and parsed down to the individual activities. You have a project in period 4, but you might start in period 3 with that right-of-way acquisition and getting that in the tip then.
Mr. Vice Chair, it's a great point. Again, I think we could dive into some of those financial related elements on the 15th, but certainly that's the intent to be a part of this. I don't know, Jamie, if you want to just address it at a high level to start.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. In terms of the cash flow, if you have any sort of details you have in mind, Paul, that would be helpful. I just wanted to let everybody know that the statutes do refer to producing annually a 5-year transportation improvement program that is consistent with the regional transportation plan elements, and it then calls out some things that are required to be included. So there is a requirement to produce an annual RTA tip, so we intend to do that. But in terms of your comment, Paul, were you thinking something further out than the 5 years for your cash flow?
Yeah, so I was thinking, thanks for bringing that up with regard to the entire program. I think we need to have a rough 20-year cash flow. We have an anticipated revenue rate. We have an anticipated burn rate, and we should really start to hone in if it, particularly if it passes, what does the program look like in detail across that 20 years? And that's constantly going to be adjusted. But there should be, I think, some type of master cash flow analysis that is constantly updated as to how we're burning it, and is constantly updated to how the revenue's coming in. Otherwise, I think we find ourselves in a bit of a gray area that we found in RTA 1 of not knowing in some areas and taking the conservative approach and not doing projects. It's better if you start off with something rough and it's constantly refined, but it's indeed the program.
Yeah, I think Mr. Tao wants to speak to that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Kiesler, we are working on a 20-year cash flow, and as you stated, it will of course have to be adjusted periodically, but I believe on the 15th we'll have a reasonable draft to present to this subcommittee.
Thank you, James. And then Jim also had a comment, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was just going to add and kind of follow on what James was talking about. One of the things that we're going to need from our jurisdictional partners is a time frame and cash flow that they expect on these projects. So we know that some of these projects, I mean, even a simple one might take 75 months, and that would necessarily span over two periods. So we need to look at that, and so we'll be looking for guidance from you all in terms of how long you think you would need to take to deliver these projects and get a budget of the work scheduled. So we'll be needing to reach out to you on that.
Yeah, ultimately, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, this is something that we're going to need to partner on continuously throughout the life of the program. And we intend to develop some templates to help with that tracking and monitoring. And we'll need to come up with processes through our committees and our structure to have discussions about the projects at hand and look where we have some gaps. If we know that we have a big project and it's going to be several years out before construction starts, there may be some items that are going to get going, design, environmental right-of-way utilities, but what's that gap between the total cost of the project and those 5 years in the tip? How do we fill that gap in the meantime? So it'll be a continual process. We'll have some templates and framework for further discussion on the 15th to start that discussion, but it'll be through the entire program that we intend to keep that going.
Good. Before we leave this, then maybe coming back to Fausto's ask, in that paragraph that says, in the event there is an opportunity to start construction on a project, do we want to add in there where it says to start construction, including right-of-way acquisition?
Sure.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Okay. All right. Any objections to the proposed approach here. Okay. Log that one as consensus.
Back to the other comment.
With that, Adam brought up a good point. Are we okay with saying that we have consensus here on this response for 74 in addition to the previous comment?
I think we do. And yeah, I forgot that how we got to this was the prior comment. So I think we have consensus here, and then we can go back up top and also indicate consensus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize. We'll be doing this multiple times throughout. We have several references because we have several like-minded folks with the comments. So
yeah, no apologies needed. I got lost on how we got there, but it was a good discussion, and I think we landed at the right spot.
great. And so that was also the original comment was back on comment number 18.
Okay.
With that, we can move on to 19, cost overruns from Oro Valley. Original comment from page 3, item 6 on the POPs. Regarding the responsibility to pay for costs exceeding plan amounts, commenter states needs to be enforced, very difficult or impossible to enforce. And again, with this one and the next comment, we are recommending that we defer to the process outlined for comment number 80, which we can go down to.
Can we see that next comment there? So we're looking.
Yes, absolutely. So the next comment for scope changes suggests limiting this to significant scope increase. Otherwise, it might be challenging to isolate materials cost increases from inflation-driven cost increases and competing interpretations. Okay. We also have one below for soft costs, which we all already discussed and reached consensus that also aligned with comment 80. Okay. So perhaps we can go down to that. Again, this process that we had outlined was we would follow this process, steps 1 through 3, whenever we have overages.
Yeah, so this would address both the cost overages comment up above and the scope changes.
Correct. And with that, we received some feedback from Mike Ortega and others that the CART may also be engaged. We'll further vet out what that engagement looks like.
And we spent a bit of time earlier talking about scope changes, right? At least in the context of defining what major is. And so I think we have that item also to bolster how we're handling the two above.
Great.
Yeah, I'll agree.
Okay. Anyone else?
That.
Okay.
Right there. Yeah, that was those two, and then also number 80 itself.
Yeah, and I think on that one right there where you just changed, where it talks about scope changes, it refers to, consider aligning with comment 80, but because it's scope change related to, let's reflect whatever the other item is where we've got major change.
Mm-hmm. Good points.
So that we're cross-referencing this one against both comment 80 and whichever the item is for major change definition.
Will do, Mr. Chair. And in scrolling down, it looks like we also had one more below that also references comment number 80. That's row 33 there. So for funding needs for policy 6 regarding funding needed for RTA projects that exceeds the minimum amount in the plan remains the responsibility of the lead agency. There needs to be a provision for avoiding costs. So again, this I think aligns with that as well.
Was that from the towns or who offered that?
That was from Tucson, and that was for page 3, policy number 6.
Okay. Patrick, you have any thoughts on that? You okay with how we landed on comment 80 for addressing this one. Patrick, you're on mute, or James.
Apologies, I just had to jump off to take a call really quickly, so I missed the discussion.
Yeah, no worries. So we're looking at row 33. It was comment 23 from the city about funding needs. Says for policy 6 regarding funding need for RTA projects that exceed minimum amount, plan remains the responsibility of lead agencies. There needs to be a provision for unavoidable costs. And so the recommendation for that is to align it with comment number 80. We can scroll down to 80 again. This is the one that we've been talking about quite frequently today, about the process for dealing with funding, particularly shortfalls of funding, and that we've developed a process that enables for evaluation and consideration for those changes. And so are you comfortable that this process in 80 sufficiently addresses the comment you made up above about funding?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as we have a clear procedure laid out and I'm putting with our technical committees, that makes absolute sense.
Okay, very good. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick and Mr. Chair, for that. Okay. Okay, and then going back up, we skipped one just because I caught that out of the corner of my eye. It's row 31 from Oro Valley. This is related to IGAs and charters. All projects should have a detailed project charter that outlines the scope. The charter should be approved by the board to confirm compliance with the ballot language. And our recommendation on this is that, per our past discussion, we recommend leaving in flexibility related to the use of charter on more complex projects. If you do a quick Control F search in the POPs, the use of IGAs and or project charters is used multiple times. I think it was like 30 something times. So it's definitely in there, but it leaves it up to the jurisdictions and the RTA to determine the need for a charter in addition to the IGA, and using the IGA as the mechanism specifically to determine when a charter is needed. So we recommend leaving that process in place if that's acceptable.
Paul?
I mean, I'm okay with that flexibility, that language, the flexibility of that language. Maybe there's something to, because again, the project charter in an IGA do have a separate use and requirement. The IGA is contractual language, where the charter really talks about project details. So maybe I suggest using a charter when at all possible, understanding that maybe not every project will be able to utilize a charter.
Would you suggest that we put some language to encourage the use of charters when needed?
I would say so, because then it helps later on. You run into a roadblock, or you run into, we have to change things up, and this really kind of touches base, after that 30% is completed and it's locked in. Going back to the charter and seeing what's the overall, what's the real benefit of this project, and what's going on here. I think it also helps define, well, I guess maybe I'm talking circles here. Depends on how detailed the IGA language is too, but I guess I find that charters are a good reference for everybody when you're in the heat of battle of a project.
Mr. Chair and others, I don't see any concern with just enhancing the language to encourage their use, knowing that we already have language in there presently. So if that's acceptable, we could add that and move on.
I think it's reasonable. Anybody have an objection? Okay. Hearing none.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chair. Next comment, also related to IGAs. Whoops, sorry. Let's see here. This was comment number 25 from City of Tucson. Policy 8 indicates the procedures may be developed on a project-specific basis in an IGA. The comment is, what does this mean? We recommend deleting this clause. So maybe we can go to the POPs, page 3, policy 8. Is the policy of the RTA board that procedures may be developed on a project-specific basis within each IGA and or charter, while an IGA and or project charter may provide more detail or specify a variance from the procedures set forth in this document. They may not change a policy. It just seems a little bit circular. So if anyone feels that we really need to keep this, we can revise this. But again, if you read through this section, it's a bit redundant of the other discussions related to IGAs and charter use.
I think the project or the comment having originated with lack of clarity about what it even meant, I think that it's a good candidate for removal, particularly, Dan, based on what you said, that the other provisions in that section provide sufficient detail on what we're doing around IGAs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any concerns with deleting that? Okay, none.
Okay, moving on, the next comment is related to soft costs. This is comment number 26 from the city. Page 3, policy 9. Policy 9 requires that the lead agency efficiently manage soft costs, and the comment is need to unpack this, set percentage limits, eliminate DCRs, and if we could go to response number 40. We could, if you want to, we could review the POPs real quick, just so you can see what that says. It is the policy of the RTA board to require that the lead agency manage soft costs associated with RTA projects to the fullest extent possible in order to maximize funding available for actual construction. RTA funding limits for specific cost items may be set forth as necessary in the IGA and/or project charter. And our response to that, per number 40, is section 1.1, policies 9 and 17L are complementary. So with that, it is recommended by staff to leave both as currently written. So if we go to 17L perhaps as well to see the full package, staff time directly attributed to project as defined in the project charter and IGA. So we feel that this is okay as is, but if there are concerns, we can certainly address them.
Can we go back up to the first provision that we looked at in the POPs?
Sure, it's number 9.
Policy. Manage soft costs. All right. And so if we go back to the comment sheet, the city's ask on this one, if we scroll back up to the actual ask,
there we go, number 26. City's ask, policy 9 requires that the lead agency efficiently manage soft costs, and the comment is, do we need to unpack this and set limits or eliminate DCRs?
Now, my sense is the language in the POPs is encouraging, right? It has to the extent possible, right? And so I don't know that we need to go further in. We've had some of this conversation around other comments on the POPs. And I think we've tended to not go with an approach of setting percentage limits. I don't know what the eliminate DCRs component of the city's comment is. Patrick, maybe you can weigh in on it. I think over the time that we've been having discussions, we've sort of found our way through, some of these things, either by saying it's too inflexible to set limits, or they're more encouraging or advisory, saying do these things to the extent possible. And so would appreciate your input on whether this requires further attention. I think the two sections of the POPs that we talk about here in this comment, and then also comment 40, fall into the category of what we've discussed previously.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity. I agree with that. I think as an advisory policy, it makes sense, and we should attempt to control soft costs to the best of our ability. Probably handled on that project by project basis that we've been discussing as it comes up. And I think the issue is that we just didn't want to put we didn't want to be too prescriptive at this time of what that might look like in terms of eliminating, alternatives evaluation, DCR development, or earlier phases of public engagement as appropriate to the project, not necessary for every project.
Okay. Staff.
Thank you for that confirmation. Jim just had another follow-up real quick.
Mr. Chair, I think leaving this fairly general is a good point at this point. This was originally put into the POPs because during the development of the 2006 plan, there was discussion as they were honing in on the final list projects and the final cost estimates. They did actually reduce the amounts of soft costs, things for design, for construction management, things like that. And that's the history behind this particular request. I don't think we have that issue on this current or on the 2026 plan.
Okay. So it sounds like we've got consensus on leaving it in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, we'll move on to comment number 27, related to project implementation. The comment is, suggest adding the following text. The RTA will facilitate project implementation by coordinating advanced right-of-way acquisition and overall project management, utilizing in-house staff or outside advisors to assure overall program progress. Direct project involvement by the RTA will be defined and limited in the IGA. So our response to this is this aligns with our current direction on how to move forward from our executive director in his memo. We just suggest some revised verbiage as part of the overall commitment to enhance project delivery, project involvement, including key roles and responsibilities by their member jurisdictions and/or RTA members, will be defined in the IGA. So I think it aligns with the original comment, but is a little more general.
And we did talk about this earlier. I think that that approach is reasonable, and we understand that it will tie into a series of strategies that will enable RTA to provide support services to jurisdictions, either through direct staffing resources or contracted resources. So I think we're comfortable. Well, I believe the group was comfortable previously in this discussion. So any objections here?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
We should all thank Mr. Lewick for leaving his comments with us before vacating his role on the committee.
Oh, you're giving yourself too much of a hard time for that pass grenade. Curtis threw us many. All right, moving on. Comment number 31 from Oro Valley related to ITS. And we didn't have a chance to discuss this one internally, so it should actually be a C. The placement of fiber optic lines should be considered a requirement and legitimate expense of an RTA corridor project. So open to discussion on this.
So Paul, that was your comment?
Yeah. So yeah, since I'm the author here, I look at fiber optic much the same as I look at MUPs and bike lanes. It's a new paradigm. We have the county middle mile that's coming through, and I think at a minimum, conduits need to be established in the right of way. Conduits maybe owned by the jurisdiction that is there so that when fiber optic companies come in to do things, you don't have to tear up a brand new road. It's inexpensive, but I think a very worthwhile endeavor. And maybe we have to have some definition and some rails put onto it. Like maybe it's a duct bank. And we look to other people smarter than me to figure out the size of that duct bank. But again, an inclusion, because it is the way of the future.
Let me go to Bill Carroll, then I'll go to staff.
I would agree with Paul. I mean, fiber optics is necessary infrastructure, and providing for it for the future, I think makes sense. Rather than trying to deal with it after the road's been built.
Thanks, Bill. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Turn over to Jim.
Mr. Chair, one of the reasons that this was discussed was had to do with concerns about if we were to install ducts, put in jurisdictional owned fiber, and there was a lease associated with those fiber lines, who would be responsible, or who would be benefiting from the lease payments. So I think that's a question that we probably ought to talk about in the future. I don't know that it needs to be dealt with at this point. I fully subscribe to the idea of putting infrastructure in, but if it's a revenue source, it's probably something we ought to all at least be mindful of as we're going forward.
Paul.
Jim, I absolutely agree with you. It shouldn't be. It should be done. It should not be done under the auspice of trying to make some money. And I'm not even saying putting fiber in. I'm just saying duct banks of dark conduit, and so that it's there and ready. At a minimum, signal to signal, but maybe even some more empties, so that again they can go in without tearing things up, because quite frankly, we have plenty of fiber companies that are hitting us up right now, and yes, we are charging them to go in. I would say that if the bank was already in, we wouldn't be charging them any different than if the bank wasn't there, because we're charging them on a per foot basis. But again, this is purely to avoid future disruption rather than creating some type of an enterprise fund.
Yeah, and I think in addition to disruption, right, it's going to be more costly. So there's that component of it as well. And I would suggest to RTA staff, reach out to Michelle Simon. She's our director of the County Office of Digital Inclusion, is leading that middle mile project, and glean some input from Michelle on this topic, bring it back to us as part of a follow-up discussion. The county is in the process of updating its license agreement for fiber placement. And so, there's both the concept of, the fiber itself, as well as, dark fiber conduit. And, how do we approach that? So I think Michelle could be helpful in just understanding the broader context of what's being done with middle mile, and how, we can leverage this effort through RTA Next to help further the objectives of middle mile, right? The goal is to get high speed, affordable broadband service to all residents in the county. And so I think it'd be worthwhile to, get some input there. Let me go to staff. You've had your hands up a bit, and then I'll come back to you, Paul.
I'll throw a couple extra considerations in there, and it sounds like we would have to flush this out. So it's more for the good of the group as you're pondering this, and several items that we've seen, watched, or heard of, more anecdotally. So I don't have a lot of data on this, and we can add that to the discussion. There's a advent going to a lot of wireless, particularly in the signal communications activities that we've heard and seen about, that there's a lot more than envisioned 10 years ago when fiber was the sole desired means and method. And now we've seen that value, benefit, or possible need be replaced with a wireless. So that's one component is, will evolving technology change or alter this? That's number one. Jumping into logistics, several of these projects that we've got are segments on a big corridor. All we may have done is make a mile or 2 miles of 10 miles more palatable, but what are we doing about the other 10 miles? Where's that coming from? How's that being handled? Where are we getting system connectivity when we're only touching a small portion of it? Also, when it comes to implementation, ran into this on some of the old projects, are we specifying installation, mandreling, tracer wires, so that when future blue stake endeavors come through, we're avoiding to make sure none of this gets cut, damaged, or broken? And will there be a gap in time between when the fiber is installed? Because this stuff does settle if it's not immediately taken care of and initiated. So complications that we've heard in dealing with some of the utility providers on their own situations that we just want to make sure we have eyes open going into this.
Yeah, Rick, and thanks for outlining, those additional considerations. I think we have to be thoughtful about it, and I feel right that there's at least enough here for consideration of inclusion of costs if done in a way that sufficiently addresses those other factors that you just mentioned. So I think we need to reserve this for continued discussion after some more information is gathered. So when you get input back from Michelle, sort of summarizing that, but then also laying out in an outline those items you just mentioned and any others that have to at least be taken into consideration and solved for before we render a final decision on it. Catherine?
Yeah, I'll just add briefly. I think the same process that's been outlined for other enhancements, if you will, of a project, which is we have a budget for these roadway projects. If fiber, conduit, whatever fits into it, that's great. If it doesn't, I don't know if that's the element that should allow more RTA funding to go to a project. So I just feel like we could use some of the already established processes that the committees look at before we make a hard decision on this particular project element.
I think that's a valid point, right? We've spent a lot of time crafting approaches to allow for flexibility and to accommodate specific needs, provided that they remain within the overall budget. And I'm just curious, Paul, I'll come to you in a second. Just curious, Rick, can you comment, did the HDR cost estimates include installation of fiber or conduit?
I don't believe we got in that level of detail, and I'm going to say no, we did not include that provision.
Okay, so if you can just confirm that, I mean, that'd be helpful for us to know going into the subsequent discussion. Paul?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, what I've seen here when roads are being constructed, say new roads are being constructed, it's such a minor cost element during that new construction where it becomes a major cost element as an afterthought. But the 2 points I wanted to make was, one, as staff is talking to Michelle, make sure that as you're talking to her, that we're getting information from her on what she's doing, but it's not just for the middle mile loop. We have a whole lot of stuff that's off that middle mile loop. And even if it's a mile at a time, it's a mile less at a time that needs to get dug up with that higher rate, that higher disturbance later on. It's putting plastic in the ground for the time being.
Yeah, excuse me. Paul, that's a great point. And, Michelle will tell you, right, that the middle mile isn't the end of the initiative to extend both, high speed and affordable broadband service. It's a jumping off point, right? So it extends out infrastructure so that no single service provider has to carry the burden of the spine, if you will, right? But that's a jumping off point, and there are lots of miles of need that will have to be met out there. And so that point about there are other areas is well taken, and Michelle is very very versed in it, and can provide, I think, good context to the conversation that we're having. Bill?
I was just going to say, I don't see the fact that it doesn't connect to anything being any different than when we have a developer put sidewalk in front of his property that he's being developed when there's no sidewalk on either side. It's something that's in place so that when we need it, it's there, and that we don't have to go back and put it in place later.
Thanks, Bill. That comes from a man who had to explain to his client why he has to put in sidewalk that connects to nothing.
They don't get it.
All right, good. I think we can move on from this. And Dan, time check wise, we're coming up about a quarter till the hour. I know there's an agenda item on to take a look at the future agenda item and timeline. So I will defer to you as to when to stop on this effort and cut over to that conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good discussion. We'll come back with a follow-up on that last one. I think we could try to address one or two more, maybe around 11:45. We switch over to the next agenda item on the timeline, if that works for you, Mr. Chair.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Next item is comment number 33 from the city. This is relating to policy 11, refers to a corridor study, and the comment is, can we define? And staff recommendation is to define this under the definition section. This is a very high-level definition for review. A corridor study, a planning study, feasibility study, corridor master plan, design concept report, or other planning or scoping document that does not constitute final design. I did offer some very broad flexibility there with not final design, because one of the things I think we're going to be looking at as part of future delivery is, do we need all the design plans that are currently in place? And since we don't have the answer to that, I broadly defined it as not final design for consideration.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. I know the city made this comment, but since it's a definition, anyone have thoughts, including the city, but anyone have thoughts on that language? Seems reasonable to me.
Okay. And if there are any final, follow-up comments, it should be easy enough to address them. This was a first stab at it, so happy to address any comments that people might have.
Looks like we've got consensus for the time being.
Okay, moving on to, I think we actually addressed this one as part of our past discussion. So this one, I believe we reached consensus on. So moving on to row 52 regarding, this is comment 42 from Ore Valley. Comment, need to define reasonable with regard to public outreach expenses. So we had some discussion last time. Suggested wording is public outreach charges directly associated with project activities. Eligible items include the following: facility charges and fees, including necessary equipment, light snacks and refreshment only. Food items such as pizza, sandwiches, prepared meals, etc. are not eligible. Flyers, handouts, brochures, and other educational items. Promotional products, merchandise, and giveaways are not eligible. It is highly encouraged that these charges be closely monitored by the lead agency to limit costs. So this was discussed last time, and the eligible is listed, and then the brackets are not eligible associated with those items. Any other follow-up comments or questions for this one?
Dan, just to clarify, I mean, the note originally was that you'd work with Paul. So the suggested language, was that result of having those follow-up conversations?
We did not. I apologize, Paul.
Sorry, Paul.
It's, I think Dan's speaking for me very well right now.
All right, good.
Yeah, it was the concern. I think I think he hit the spirit of what my concerns were. So I believe we're good here.
Excellent. Dan, I
Thank you, Paul.
appreciate you channeling your inner Paul. So anybody else have an objection to that? All right.
You know, my middle name is Paul, so it must have been that. Next comment is 43 from the city, public outreach, providing food to a volunteer. Oh, this is the same. So this is a similar comment recommending the above. If we're all good, we can just utilize that response. Oh, Mike is here. I apologize. Mike had a comment real quick.
Yeah, hey, Carmine and team, just thinking about that for a minute, I think there's a difference between a public outreach, like an open house, and a committee that is gathered for a specific purpose. And I would be careful in honing that down so closely that you say you can't feed them, especially if they're a group of volunteers that are helping us with something. So I just suggest that you think through that and maybe be careful about that. I understand not having open houses where you're feeding them. That's fine. I have no issue with that. But if you've got a group of very specific volunteers, citizens group, I mean, the least we could do is feed them if they're meeting in the evenings or after hours. That's just a thought. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that, Mike. With that, Mr. Chair, if it's helpful, maybe we could add a comment to this effect for other considerations and when it might be appropriate to consider something like that.
Yeah,
go ahead, Mr. Chair, sorry.
I think if we put something in there to distinguish and say something to the effect that, authorized working committees, right, are eligible, right, or not subject to the, limitations, or either way, you can say it in the permissive or in the prohibitive, but you get the idea. If it's an authorized, right, authorized working committee, so that we don't just, ad hoc classify something as a committee. You okay with that, Paul?
That's good.
All right.
Hey, and with that, Mr. Chair.
I mean, I was going to say, I absolutely agree with Mike. If you've got people coming in to volunteer their time, yes, they need to be taken care of properly.
Okay.
My comment above was basically controlling meetings, general public meetings.
Understood. Yep. Thanks, Mike, for that input, and appreciate the additional comment that'll be added. And we're probably at time to maybe convert over now and talk about the timeline and future agenda items. And let me just say, I mean, thank you, everyone, the committee members for wading through that. I felt, that it was important that we take the items that required deeper discussion first, and that, ease the burden on the back end of this meeting. But just a tremendous thanks to staff. I mean, the amount of attention and work that has gone into not only gathering up input from this committee, but listening and tracking, and then offering recommendations that were aligned with the feedback that you received. So I feel very encouraged by what we accomplished here today, and look forward to continuing the work as we move through our next meetings.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Chair. We really appreciate that, and echo your comments. We really appreciate everyone's participation in this. It's been a huge effort and a lot of time, so thank you. With that, we didn't quite finish today, but we made a ton of progress. We currently have a bye week for next week on the 8th. I have not received a lot of responses that too many people are available. Some are, but I'm not sure if we have a quorum yet based on the responses received to date. So perhaps we could consider this two ways. We could either reconfirm today if there's a need and availability to finalize this conversation next week. We could do that. Or if there's not, or preferably to handle this by email, we could update this with the comments, send it out, and give you all a week to confirm our responses for the Bs that have not been discussed, or other options. Just throwing those two out there for consideration, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate that, Dan. You know, I appreciate input from the committee on whether to convene on October 8th. I think you know, we've got still some pretty substantial topics lying ahead for us on the 15th and the 22nd. You know, do we reach out again and seek to confirm availability? And if we've got a quorum, move forward on October 8th. I'm available. I don't know what others' availability is. Do we want to handle the remainder of this via email, sending out that list of remaining items and have people respond back to whether they have objection or changes on any items? That may be a viable approach as well. Or just skip it altogether and then seek to add it on to the 15th with the topics about financial considerations and planned health indicators, analysis and reporting. I think that's going to be a pretty deep conversation, and I just want to make sure we're not pushing too much on ourselves at the deadline. Bill?
We got through the needs discussion and we're in the suggested language. It would seem like we could send it out. Hopefully the suggested language is going to be something that the majority of us can agree to. But if there are some issues that need to be popped back at to staff, that could be done over the course of the next week. And then it would seem like there wouldn't be much to talk about on the 15th. If there are any real objections to some of the suggested language, we could deal with that at the beginning of the 15th, but at least we wouldn't have to go through item by item by item by item.
I like that suggestion, Bill. I think, you know, having gone through a good portion of the staff recommendations, I feel comfortable that we've captured the intent of what was requested by the committee. Dan, maybe for your team's consideration and feedback right now, if we were to send out the document with a request to folks to give feedback on any items that are objectionable or any desired changes, and have that back to you by October 8th, then as Bill suggested, any of those ones where there is an open question or issue, we could touch upon at the start of the October 15th meeting.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think we could do that. We might not need responses back by the 8th. It'll be tight to try to update it and send it out by tomorrow. We have an event on Friday. So we can get that to you either hopefully by the end of tomorrow or early next week for review, and then give everyone perhaps a week. And as long as we don't have substantial comments, I think that would allow us to stay on schedule.
Okay. I mean, I'll leave the timing to you in terms of when you're able to get the updated document out and when you'd like comments back. And then we will focus on any items of objection or concern or any needed changes then on the 15th. Does that work for everyone on the committee?
With that, Mr. Chair, if we do need a little bit of time for final comment resolution on the 15th, we may need to potentially expand the timing a little bit to add that in. So, you know, if we start at, we've been starting at 8:30 with the exception of today was 8. I think we could probably still start at 8:30, but maybe just add on a little at the tail end as needed. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think that would work. Sounds like the preference is to maybe take a little more time if needed at the 15th rather than convening the group on the 8th. So I think we'll remain flexible to either tack on, at the beginning or at the end of the meeting to fold that in.
With that, based on the comments that we get, I can circle back with you and the vice chair, Jim and I, and just make sure that we accommodate enough time for the agenda for the 15th.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Anything else then, team, on the timeline?
No, Mr. Chair, nothing else has changed here. So unless there are any questions on what we have coming up, I think we're good to go.
So any questions or comments from committee members before we wrap up? Okay, hearing none. If no objections, then we will adjourn. Have a great day. Thanks all for the tremendous work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.